All right, how's it going, everybody? My name is Antonio, and most of you know me as an aspiring barbecue master who tries to grow companies on a weekly basis and mostly jokes around. But this will be a more serious video, or at least as serious as it could get with me, because over the last few months, I've been going to different conferences and asking mining and exploration executives what the main challenge is for them and what the main challenge they foresee will be in the future. There's a few answers that always keep coming back really with the two the two ones that stood out to me the most being local opposition and labor. There's, first of all, apparently not enough skilled labor. I think a lot of people already know that, but there's not enough skilled labor in the mineral exploration development space, and the number of students graduating with relevant degrees is also in decline, partly due to obviously the general cyclicality of the sector, the preference for tech jobs or office jobs, not necessarily field jobs, and also the fact that mining overall has a bad reputation almost everywhere you look. And all that makes it a challenge to attract young people to the space, of course, despite there being many well-paid career opportunities, as far as I understand it. And then the next main challenge, as I said, was local opposition, specifically challenging engagement processes with the First Nations in Canada. So I started looking into those issues as two separate risks in an effort to interview someone about them. But quickly enough, I found out that Indigenous students, so First Nation students specifically, despite often being very close to where most of the action happens in the exploration space, are generally let me try again, underrepresented. Is that how you say it? I think so. They're generally underrepresented, something like those lines, in university-like jobs like engineers and geologists and so on, right? Often because they face lower education levels, higher dropout rates, and limited access to quality education due to factors that are oftentimes outside of their control, such as geological proximity to schools. And even if there is proximity, they're often underfunded schools, so not often the best ones, but also inadequate resource distribution within those communities. And on top of that, obviously, cultural disconnect between mainstream education systems and indigenous ways of learning, which makes all of the things that I mentioned previously even more challenging. And over time, it's resulted in this belief that it's sort of us versus them, if you will, with us being the mining and exploration companies and investors versus indigenous communities. And I hear that demeanor in many of the industry CEOs that I talk to these days. While it doesn't have to be that way, I think. So helping more Indigenous students get a higher education and a better employment can set an example for the next generation after them, and then that generation sets the example for the one after them, and then that one for the one. You get the point, right? Eventually, if a good enough job is done by our industry, we can get to a level where the mantra of us versus them is just gone, and we all work together, benefiting the entire sector, and with it, obviously, the entire economy, hopefully our portfolios. I understand I sound naive, I do. But long story short, or semi-long at least, again, call me a naive kid, but I got in touch with the Young Mining Professionals, which is a nonprofit organization specializing in giving scholarships and grants to students. And they told me that they can come up with a First Nation scholarship specifically tailored to Indigenous students who might want to pursue a higher education in the space, but don't necessarily have the financial capability to do so. Unfortunately, my personal portfolio hasn't been treating me too well over the last couple of years, and the only value that I can bring to the table for now is this platform. And I suppose your eyeballs, which for some reason are still paying attention to me after a couple of years of bad wife jokes and a whole lot of talking. And so in this episode, it is the normal type of barbecue with a cherry on top, if you will, because I'm providing this platform to 5 companies that are actively engaged in the mineral exploration development industry in Canada to try and better understand the process of communicating and evolving the First Nations that those companies are operating with or close to into the process of exploration and development. And so I also reached out to some of the financial institutions, by the way, in our industry that also could be doing a better job in this regard. And one of them, Sprott Asset Management, as well as all 5 of these companies, have agreed to make a donation for the First Nations scholarship, bringing in a total of $12,500, which is an obscene amount of money to me. And I'm happy that these companies are putting it forward. I'm very thankful. All of which, by the way, as far as I understand, it gets directly deposited into the scholarship fund organized by the Young Mining Professionals. But I won't just give them the money without asking a few annoying questions. So I invited Stephen Stewart. He's the chairman of the scholarship fund to basically tell me what the money will be used for and how it all works. So yeah, Stephen, what is the Young Mining Professional Scholarship Fund in the first place?
It's a fund that was started about 5 years ago. It was born out of the success that the Young Mining Professionals group itself has had. It was started here out of Toronto. It's based out of Toronto, operated by Tony Moreau of American Eagle and myself. And its primary objective is to raise money to attract and retain the best talent that we possibly can in the mining industry in Canada. In the past few years, I think this year we gave away $125,000. Before that, it was $225,000. The year before that, it was 250. It was a record year for us, and it keeps on growing. And again, it's just about creating awareness for the industry as a whole to try and combat often what is perceived as we are the bad guys. So it does have this I guess, altruistic bent to it that, hey, mining folk are good people. We're starving for people. And I think that's part of the real reason why we started this is because I think the industry's best natural resource are its young people. This is a bald man's business or a gray hair business, if you will. And that generation is fading, and we need to repopulate the industry with young people, and it struggled to do so. One, because of the cyclicality of the job market. I mean, this is such a cyclical business. Half the time we're laying people off. Last 12, 13 years have been tough. And then, of course, there's just this misinformation, this misnarrative about how mining is the bad guy. So that doesn't help in our recruiting process, which, as I said, a completely false narrative. So the Young Mining Professionals does its best to educate at the grassroots level to say that mining is absolutely critical part of our way of life, of our communities, and nation building, and it generates wealth, real wealth, not just for shareholders, but for people that are surrounding the mining community. Clearly, if you're going to dig a hole in the ground, there are impacts. But the argument is, and it's obvious to anybody who takes the time to look into the details, that the net impacts are a big positive. And the infrastructure, the roads, the schools, the taxes, the royalties, the employment that is generated from this industry. And it's not just the mine itself, it's the ancillary businesses that fall off from it, the snowmobile, the truck dealerships, the insurance, the catering. All those businesses are surround a mine, and it just allows the community to thrive. And also, I think particularly this initiative, which I have to thank you, Antonio, for spearheading and initiating. There's a lot of your time that you put in here to raise this money, particularly towards the First Nations, who are, I wouldn't say underrepresented in the industry. And in fact, I'd say they're very well represented in Canada in the mining and the exploration industry. I believe that our industry is the #1 employer of First Nations people of any industry. However, where I think a better job and can be done is the higher paying jobs, and that's where the Young Mining Professional comes in, and that's why I think it's very important what you've done is said, hey, I want to support the First Nations, which we have other scholarships in place with the YMP that does that as well, but we need more to educate its young people to get higher education, go geology, mining, post-secondary education, and I think that's a compounding thing. So it's not just that individual that you are supporting. It's that individual goes back into their community and tells their brothers, their sisters, their parents, their uncles, and their children about the benefits, the true benefits that mining can bring to the individual, the community, and our nation at large. So I think this is a wonderful initiative. Incredibly grateful for all of our donors, and people like you, Antonio. Again, thank you for bringing further eyeballs to our efforts. We're all volunteers. I emphasize that, And I emphasize also that any donations we receive, 100% of that dollar goes directly to students. 100%. So
Mm.
that's something we're very proud of.
Thank you for the kind words, and thank you for making this possible as well, obviously. Well, the 100% thing you said is interesting to me because I looked at it on Charity Navigator before working on this and thought like, okay, how do I know what's a good charity? I've never given to those kind of amounts to charity myself. I don't have a lot of money, and so I wanted to make sure this is right. And it said that you should like less than 33%, so less than a third of the money should go to administrative expenses. I mean, and you as a charity, you probably have administrative expenses. How does that get covered?
Covered by YMP Toronto. So YMP Toronto is a not-for-profit organization. It generates revenue through sponsorships and events and is, call it cash flow positive. So the way we've structured it is that the net positive cash flow, or a portion of it, that YMP Toronto, again, which is a separate and distinct organization, so its free cash flow covers all of our administration costs, which are negligible. I mean, I shouldn't say negligible, but there are banking costs. There's a cost to running a website. There are modest costs associated with existing in the modern world, if you will. Nobody, but like I emphasize, nobody gets paid at all. Period. End of story. But there are just sort of ancillary costs, and our not for profit covers that, so that we can say that every dollar that you've facilitated, Antonio, every dollar that Barrick gives us, and all of our other wonderful sponsors from Agnico to TD to Appian, and the list goes on. And the Ore Group, we're a huge sponsor as well, sponsor from day one as well. Every dollar that it goes directly to students. So I think that's impactful. That makes our sales pitch easier, because this is a sales pitch. I'm always very sensitive about charities. I give as much as I can, but you have to be very, very careful about the charities you support, because oftentimes their administration costs can be very, very high. So you often are paying salaries, you are paying for television ads, et cetera, which is arguable. But anyways, we won't get into that. But I think the real point is here, we've set it up so that all of our donee funds go directly to students where it matters most.
Okay. So you don't necessarily sit on cash or try to do something else. It's really it just goes to students. You have it, and you
Every
just
dollar in goes out. I mean, it's all, it all flows through 100%. So if
okay.
we get $25,000 from Barrick, which I believe we do, $25,000 in that year goes to the student. So it's actually, it sounds nice, and it is nice, but it's actually quite onerous in our fundraising efforts. It would be lovely
Hmm.
to be endowed and be able to sit on $1 million fund and pay out our interest, et cetera, et cetera. But we're not in that situation. So every year we raise, this year we raised 225 million. Excuse me, I wish $220,000, and all of that money goes out the door.
Okay. Fair enough. Well, it's a good point that you mentioned the amounts here. I was not sure if I can bring that up, but um, how far is this money gonna go that Research Talks has helped collect? It's $12,500. What does that get?
Well, I guess that's something that you and I are going to discuss, and ultimately you're going to decide upon. So how we structure it is that all of our donor partners get to design their own scholarships. So and everyone is a little bit unique. $12,500 can go to one person. It can go to five people in $2,500 tranches. That's for our donors to decide. And again, you've chosen to give it to First Nations individuals. Some people choose to give it to women. Some people choose to give it to economically challenged. So there's, and others are very jurisdictional focused. For example, I mentioned Agnico as a supporter. They're not necessarily focused on the First Nations, but they're focused on people who live north of the 60th parallel. So everybody is a little bit, everybody's different. We work with our donor partners to make it easy for them. We do all the heavy lifting. They just have to give us financial support. We sit down, we consult about the parameters and how the process works, which is really quite straightforward. And we do the rest. And I have to say, we're almost a victim of our own success. It's been we get thousands and thousands of applications every year, which is wonderful to see. But that's a lot of work, and we take it very seriously. We have, again, all volunteers. We have, I think, 50 people helped us sort through and vet these scholarships so that the most qualified individual wins. So that's a lot of work. And it's also a lot of work on the front end to raise this money. Again, that's why we're so grateful for initiatives like this that not only bring in real cash that we'll give away, but also gives us eyeballs. And hopefully there's somebody out there watching this that is a part of our industry and wants to support us and wants to support young people. And the last point I'll make is that not only are we doing good, which makes us feel great and actually does contribute to the industry, we've evolved into kind of an HR platform in the sense that our partners, our donee partners, whether that's again Barrick, Appian, the OR group, we get access and we provide everybody who's applied to the scholarship to the donors. And they and what is that? Well, that's just the best and the brightest in the industry. And I can't tell you how many people we've connected with internships, but real jobs. Um, so I think we are a gateway to young people. The industry's starving for young people. So the Young Mining Professional Scholarship Fund not only supports young people's education, but it connects them with the industry who's starving for high quality individuals. And me speaking on my own account, I would say 50% of the people who work for the OR group, this is our organization, I have met, not necessarily through the scholarships, but I've met through the young mining professionals. And so it's been a treasure trove for me in terms of meeting peers and future leaders.
Well, thank you very much, Stephen, for this overview. I hope we can do this more. But yeah, let's see how it goes. If someone's watching this and they do want to get in touch or whatever, where do they reach you?
They can reach us, go to ympscholarship.com or find me on any one of our OR group websites. My emails are listed there and contact me. And we're always happy to talk to people interested in supporting us.
All right. Well, thank you, Stephen, for this overview, for the intro. I now want to hear from a few companies that are currently working, exploring, or developing assets on different territories of different First Nations in Canada. And I'll be taking it up by market cap. We're going to start off with Storm Exploration, a gold exploration company with 4 assets in Ontario. Company is listed on the TSX Ventures Exchange and the ticker symbol STRM, where an average of about 40,000 shares trade each day with a 52-week high of 24 cents and a 52-week low of 4 cents. With a market cap of just $1.5 million and 41 million shares outstanding today, this is a 4-cent stock. There are also 10 million warrants and 4 million options, resulting in about 55 million fully diluted shares, with management and advisors holding 10% of the company. Institutions like Sprott and US Global and Crescent Capital holding 29%. Family offices holding 34%, and about 27% is then left in the hands of retail investors. As of the last interim financial statement, which is dated September 30th, the company had just about 100 grand in current assets, about half of which was cash and the other half was prepaid expenses. And there's also a small part of an expected tax rebate. While on the current liability side of the balance sheet, they're set about $500,000 in account payables with no long-term debt. As I'll keep reminding you, though, you will have to go to the company's website as well, setterplus.ca, by the time you're watching this, to review the most up-to-date financials, because things change. Companies are active. For Storm specifically, it costed them about an average of $60,000 a month for the 3 months ended in September of 2023. So do pay attention to that yourself and don't rely on these numbers. Boring stuff aside, though, Storm has, as I said, 4 large-scale gold projects in Ontario, 3 of which are right in between 4 major gold camps, including Red Lake and Timmins. More specifically, they're in the Fort Hope area, which is a major greenstone belt on which Storm is looking for a BIF-related gold deposit, which is short for Banded Iron Formation gold deposits. Those are exactly what you'd imagine, by the way. They're basically bands or layers of oftentimes hematites or magnetites with smaller layers of silica-rich minerals in between them. Quartz, hopefully, in this case, which is important because those bands and faults and fractures that might be there that let the silica climb up and cool could potentially have been sort of like highways for valuable minerals, hopefully gold in this case, to have been transported closer to the surface as well. They're also, by the way, old rocks, among the oldest rocks that we have on Earth, actually. They started forming billions of years ago on the bottom of the sea, which is where I might find myself if this bull market doesn't start anytime soon. Now, why I'm telling you all this about BIF deposits is because they're kind of cool. They're typically not only cool from a geological standpoint, but also from a financial standpoint, if you will, because they're typically large, but they're also high grade. Think, for example, the Homestake deposit, it's an over 40 million ounce deposit at over 8 grams per ton of gold. Or on the other end of the spectrum, a smaller but not a small deposit, Pickle Crow, that's a million ounce deposit, but it is 16 grams of gold per ton, or even more than 16. So the Miminisca prospect in particular here is interesting. That's the flagship for the company. There's historic drilling on it, which says that gold mineralization is not just a thesis here anymore. There was some decent intercepts found on the iron formation itself, ranging from 2 grams, give or take, over 21 meters, all the way up to 14 grams over 5 meters. And now these kind of intercepts can be found over about a kilometer in strike length, depending on how you measure it, because it's sort of in a Z formation, if you will. And then moving to the north from that target is where the Kizik target is, another historically drilled target with, again, some high-grade intercepts of mostly double digits gold, but over shorter intervals, as you can probably see on your screen right now. I probably have a table on there. STRM is also currently earning into a 100% interest here at Miminisca and Kizik, with the option to pay the earn-in price in shares too. That's hopefully something we can discuss later on, though. And then the third project in the Fort Hope area south of Miminisca is called Atwood. This is 100% owned, and this one has also been drilled, also delivered a proof of concept that there is gold mineralization, but only about 20 holes were ever went into this land package, and that was over 50 years ago, suggesting that there might be some stuff that can be done better here. That's the Fort Hope area, again, where those three projects are, but to the southwest from that, and actually not too far off from the border with the US, if my map reading is correct, is where their new-ish project is. It's about a couple of years old now, or like a year and a half, something along those lines. It's called Gold Standard. Again, not just a concept. Artisanal mining here goes back more than 120 years, and base metal exploration dates back about 50 years. And on top of that, some positive data came back from a 2022 geophysical survey that STORM themselves did, showing a large conductivity anomaly on the northern boundary of the project, which notably was within host rocks that are typically associated with VMS mineralization, which is just sort of another check mark on a checklist, if you will, after copper and zinc mineralization was historically also drilled there. But the Gold Standard project was never really explored for gold, even though there are 3 gold showings, actually 3 small-scale mines on the southern end of the project boundaries. So that's what, well, that's basically what makes it interesting. Now, all of this is early stage, right? All the previous ones are, there's a lot of work to be done on this. But while the Gold Standard project already has a signed MOU on it, where the First Nations on whose land they're located on have basically said, given these conditions that are described in the MOU, sure, you can then go ahead and explore. But the other projects that I just went over in the Fort Hope area are still under review, and negotiations with the First Nations are ongoing there, which is why I wanted to talk to you specifically in this segment, Bruce, because I'm trying to better understand how the process of consulting the First Nation goes, and also just better try and understand what's taking you so long to close the MOU, because I've been following or speaking to you since, 2021 or something along those lines. So yeah, take it away and tell me how it works.
So yes, the discussion with the Fort Hope project. So that's the Abemetung First Nation, and they live in the community of Fort Hope or Abemetung. That has been going on. We've been in discussions for them for nearly 2 years to reach an MOU so that we could go drilling on the Miminisca project. And it has been quite slow. I think it's probably important to remember that in 2022, COVID was still very much a concern. And Fort Hope, Abemetung, is a fly-in, fly-out community, so it's very isolated. And they were very concerned about COVID. So that, just having the whole issue of COVID created sort of, I don't want to say obstacles, but slowed everything down in terms of me getting into the community and having discussions. And so it was one of the things that creates obstacles in moving things along. The relationship with the Abemetung has been very cordial. We're building trust. They didn't know me at first, but we've had many conversations over the course of the 2 years, and I think we're building a good rapport and trust. It's been very cordial. There's no, I don't sense any sort of desire not to have exploration in their traditional territory. But I say that there is caution. I think one of the things that's important, and one of the things that stood out for me as an explorer is, as you mentioned, the Gold Standard Project, we have signed MOUs with the 2 First Nations in whose traditional territory that project is located. Those First Nations are located on a road. They have a lot more interaction with exploration companies just because there's been a lot more activity in their traditional territory. And so they're a lot more, they have much better understanding of the process and of exploration, what the impacts are. So, the process of getting to an MOU was much quicker because they've sort of been there and done that, if you will. Whereas when you get into the more remote communities, they've had a lot less exploration. And in the case of the Abemetong, I think there's been very little exploration since about 2005. So, they're not as familiar with the process of exploration and what the impacts are on their traditional territory. I think the other thing that's important about fly-in, fly-out communities in particular, as opposed to communities which are on a road system, is that groceries in these communities are typically incredibly expensive. I would almost say obscenely expensive. So the community relies heavily on country food. It's part of their diet, right? So, it's important to them that environment stay, pristine enough that they can continue to use the land that they've traditionally used to gather food. So, that's very important to them. And I think, I don't want to say it's more important than the people in the South, but it's certainly a focus for people in a community like Fort Hope, where they are actively using the land to gather food to supplement their diet, because you just can't feed yourself out of the grocery store. It's incredibly expensive. So these are some of the other things that have contributed to the length of time is you'll have, unlike our culture, when you have a death in the community like Fort Hope, that often it involves the whole community. And if you have a meeting scheduled for the week and there's been a death in the community, often that will get postponed, and then it has to get rescheduled. And the chief, it's a small community, but he's a very busy guy. So when something has to be rescheduled, it can often be a month away or 6 weeks away. So all of these things contribute to a lengthy process. So, you've got just the sort of regular obstacles that come into play. I'll give you another example. This last summer, their water treatment plant burned down. They had to evacuate the community, right? So, they evacuated 400 of the 1,100 people that live in the community. So, that was a great disruption. They had to focus on getting that water treatment up and running. They had to get water into the community. So again, I'm not in communication with the chief while all of that's going on. And that just, again, delays the process of getting to an MOU or an exploration agreement. So you've got all those sort of regular obstacles that you see, but then there's also caution because they haven't seen a lot of exploration in their territory. They want to understand, what are the impacts because they use the land. And traditionally, particularly in remote communities, there haven't been a lot of involvement or discussion. These are really things that have changed since 2005, the requirement for companies to go into the communities and discuss what our plans are and have feedback from the community. So, there's caution with how the process should work. I think with the Abemetong, I don't think we're the first one to have an MOU with them, but we would probably in the last decade, we're probably the first ones to have an MOU.
So it's kind of like a blessing and a curse maybe at the same time. Blessing as in, for you as a company, that means the ground there is not being explored sufficiently, and definitely not with modern geological techniques and whatnot and machineries. But then at the same time, it also potentially makes it more challenging to communicate to them, which is also what I wanted to ask about. Like, how do you communicate it to them, given that this is sort of a new concept, potentially for the current generation that's there? It's mostly a new concept. So how do you communicate with them?
maybe I'm. What do you mean in terms of communicating what the opportunity is, or what the exploration project is, or how? I mean, so one of the big things that I thought was important just to establish right up front is what's the difference between exploration, which is not an extractive industry, right? What exploration is really just trying to define what's in the ground, as opposed to mining, which is an extractive industry. And where does the transition come from being an explorer, which is trying to determine what's there, into being a sort of a mining project? And for me, that that threshold is when we start talking about resources, PEAs, or pre-feasibility studies, those sorts of things. But that whole concept of separating, what's exploration, what's our goal, what are we trying to do, versus mining, which is an extractive industry. It has a completely different impact on the environment and the community, and sort of a longer term thing. Whereas exploration is really, we're just trying to find out what's there. And the impact is much less, particularly for early stage exploration. So just, I think, trying to make sure they understand that. Also, that the environmental standards that are applied to exploration and the technology that we have with respect to that has changed a great deal also in the intervening 20 years that we've seen since they've seen exploration. So there's a lot of sort of making people aware of what those differences are, and I think there's a lot of caution on their side, because they haven't had a lot of communication. The collective memory goes back a long way, right? And exploration started in their territory in the 1940s, and I think it's probably fair to say that the environmental standards and what people left in the field and did in the field, in the 40s and even into the 80s, probably it isn't anything like it was today. So they have memories of, for instance, fuel being spilled into the lake and it killing fish. And I don't know when that happens. And it wasn't made clear to me exactly when that happened, a long time ago, but it's still in the collective memory. So there's still that concern. And again, that goes to, these people use the land to supplement their diet. It's very important.
Yeah. That's exactly what I meant, as in, how do you talk to these points, and how do you really ensure the people that, hey, we're not going to do this anymore, and it is different this time around?
Yes, that's right. And I think you can only really truly show that to them by doing it. But you have to have, they want to have some safeguards in place to make sure that that's the case. And so that involves people on the ground with us when we're exploring. That's a great idea. You can't build trust unless you're actually working with the people. It's really important to have them in the camp with you when you're working, watching what you're doing. And then, also the important thing is, historically, they haven't been included in not only the discussions about what's going on, but in terms of, if there's something there, is there something that in it for them? And historically, that's been the answer has been no, but that's changing, as it should. This is their traditional territory. Yeah, and I've had a couple of people ask me, well, why? And I liken it to, if you're a farmer in Alberta, which is a part of the prairie provinces here in Canada, and an oil and gas company wanted to come onto your land and explore for oil and gas, you were at the very least consulted, and you were paid a fee to go onto that land, right? That's just natural. And if you wanted to drill a well, the same was true. And if there's something in the well, you might even have some sort of a royalty or some kind of a payment, because the oil and gas company is now on your land and they're pumping the well. I don't really see it as a whole lot different than that. This is their traditional territory. They've used this land. It's their back 40. They should be included not only in the discussions about what's going on, but also included in, if there's something here that's valuable, they should be a party to that as well.
There's also a financial aspect to it. To on top of that, which I completely agree with what you're saying here, and your recent MOU on the Gold Standard property, which is the other property that I mentioned, not in the Fort Hope area. The terms of that agreement include you contributing cash payments to a community fund, as well as issuing over 1 million shares or something like that over time. Is that typical for this type of agreement, and is this what the agreement for the Fort Hope area might look like as well?
So in terms of how typical it is, I can't really speak to that. A lot of the terms of MOUs are confidential, including ours with both the Negagoon, Seminole and the Neketchewin, which are the two First Nations around Gold Standard project. But I certainly think for us, I think it's important as part of, that whole thing with having ownership of, in this instance, having ownership of the company. So if we're successful, they're successful, but they get exposure not just to the gold standard project, but to the other things that we do. So I don't know how typical it is. It will be typical for us. I'm certainly it's on the table with our discussions with the applicant.
Right. What is typical in your experience? Like, what part of the exploration expenditures typically have to go towards closing such such an MOU?
Well, so industry standard people would tell you that it's somewhere between sort of 2 and 3% is pretty typical on an MOU. So if you're dealing with 2 or 3 different First Nations, that can get up there. You can get to 5, 6% in total in aggregate with all the different First Nations that you might be dealing with. But it's going to be, that's the part that's very confidential. It's just not shared with people. And I did a lot of research trying to find out what kind of numbers are people putting out there. And it's very difficult. There's really very little information. So you kind of got this sort of industry standard that's floated out there without a lot of evidence to substantiate that that's exactly what people are paying or companies are paying. But that's the place where the conversations start. And I think it's probably fair for me to say that we're within a reasonable within that those guidelines.
Right. Okay. What does that typically go towards? Because it goes towards the community. What is it then used for? And is there really a way for you as a company to know that the money basically goes to good and it influences everybody within the community positively?
At the end of the day, Antonio, I don't think that's my business, right? We are making a contribution to the community, and how the community distributes that money and what they use it for, I think is the business of the community. And it's not for us to really weigh in on that.
Yeah, fair point. Yeah, I like that you're not one of the people to just quickly dismiss all this and say something like, forget those Indigenous communities. They're just, getting in the way and they just want money, because there unfortunately sure is plenty of that happening in the industry, and it has been historically too. So I appreciate that you're trying to do better
Yeah,
here.
look, I feel pretty strongly. Like, there's a lot of talk about reconciliation in Canada with First Nations, and part of that is economic reconciliation, and that gets thrown around quite a bit, particularly by government. But at the end of the day, I guess I feel that it's industry that has to sort of take the first step and make that a reality. We're on the front lines with working with First Nations. So how do we, what does economic reconciliation look like? Well, for an exploration company, I think that means that the communities in which we work in their traditional territory, it means real engagement and participation, and whether that means participation in terms of working on the project and opportunities, or community contributions to the community directly, or ownership of the company or project. I mean, these are important. They're important to me.
I agree. And there's also there could be a win-win situation created here, or even a triple win, if you will, for the communities, for the company, and for the investors of that company. So putting more
Absolutely.
efforts into it.
And look, having agreements, it creates certainty, right? And so we can move forward with certainty, and you don't have this sort of looming issue ahead. You just get in front of that early and make sure it's fair and equitable.
It's what else are you moving forward with this year specifically as a company? You're hoping, I assume, to have that MOU soon on Fort Hope, but in the meantime, what's happening in between?
We'll focus on on the Gold Standard project. We have our agreements with First Nations there. It's an earlier stage project than the project, particularly Miminisca. But we can work on this project, and it's not an expensive project on which to work, because again, we're down in the road system of Canada. There in that project, there's actually roads and forestry roads that go right into where that EM anomaly that you were talking about exists. So we can get down to that project, explore on that one, relatively inexpensive. So we're going to raise a little bit of money in the future. I think your listeners will see an announcement on a financing in the relatively near future to support moving forward on that project. That was one with a little bit more work. We can be drilling on that in, say, Q2, Q3 of this year. In the meantime, we continue to work with the Abamatong on getting an agreement with them so that we can go back to work at Miminiska and Keezik and Atwood, which are fantastic projects. I keep telling my investors, and it's been challenging, right? Because over the course of the 2 years that we've been in discussion with the Abamatong, we've lost 90% of our value, and maybe even more than that. And I know a part of that is the fact that we're in a very difficult and challenging market, but a lot of it's just the fact that investors become impatient, and it's been taking a long time. My big investors are very patient, and they see the value in the project and want want me to continue working there. But so there's some of the retail investors who maybe were in it for a drill program or whatever, the possibility of a drill program, they sell their shares and your shares go down. So it's been very challenging for the shareholders of the company to watch our value diminish by the value by 90%. But I say that, Antonio, and I firmly believe that the prize is worth the patience, and it's worth my relationship, or the relationship the company has with the Abamatong, is very good. So we need to stay the course. It's worth having the patience and doing a fair deal so that we can go back to work on this project, because it's as good as it gets from my perspective. For an early stage exploration project, we spent a long time sourcing this project, and we did, and we chose it for a reason. And so I think it's worth waiting for.
So it's basically a small raise happening right now, just so you can start doing something on Gold Standard.
On Gold Standard.
Get an MOU on the Fort Hope area, and then another raise to start exploring there by the second half of the year.
That's correct.
Okay. Okay, good. When do you go to the Gold Standard project? When do you start exploring there?
Well, pretty much any time. There's still a little bit of snow on the ground, but you could do a little bit of ground geophysics, and you could do some prospecting as well. I would be, happy. Yeah, so once we get our money raised, we can get on the ground right away.
Okay. Okay.
I would expect drilling to take place it's towards the end of Q2. That would be
Q2. Okay, sure. But you already have drill targets there, if I'm not mistaken.
We do.
Okay.
We do. I'd like to refine that, so that we have more confidence. If you got 10 drill targets, you want to make sure you start on the best ones.
Sure. Yeah, of course.
And there's a little bit of not very expensive work that we can do, I think, to refine that and not get in the way of our drill season.
Right. Okay. And what are you thinking? Probably a couple of shallow holes there that I don't assume they're too expensive. What are you paying a meter? $300 ish?
Yeah, maybe 250, 300. Interestingly enough, the Nakatuinan have a drill company of their own. So they have said, please let us bid on the drilling. And it's right in their traditional territory. So it's not like you're paying to mobilize the drill very far. But yeah, we were thinking sort of half a dozen holes to test that big EM anomaly. As you mentioned, there's some historical work that said there's copper and zinc mineralization there. It was never assayed, the holes that were drilled in 1969 to 71. But that's a pretty good sign, and this is a big whopper of an EM anomaly that sure looks like it could be a result of a VMS deposit. So if that thing turns out to be a big VMS with copper and zinc credits, then it could be a very exciting year for the company. It's higher risk than, say, Miminiska, though, where there's been pretty extensive drilling, and it's pretty clear there's a lot of gold in that system.
You've also been you've walked the bush, as they say over there. You've taken a couple of pictures of the older stuff as well. So I've seen that. But you're on Gold Standard, you're basically focusing on the northern part of the project, not necessarily going down to where the historical mines were. Well, the small
Yeah, I think for initially we want to test that EM anomaly. That EM anomaly is right on a road, so it's very easy to test. And it's I don't want to discount the gold, but the gold will take longer to figure out. It's not simple. There were the old timers were there. They sank some shafts, as you mentioned. There's 3 different shafts in the southwest part of the property, which is why we acquired it. But it's not. I wouldn't say it's clear where we need to start drilling there. More work needs to happen before we start drilling for gold. We'll continue to work that up. But I think in the short term, let's go test that EM anomaly. It was a surprise to us. When we acquired the property, and I did the research on the ground around the gold showings, those drill holes from 1969 popped up as being, copper and zinc. And I thought, well, for a couple of $1,000, let's stake that ground. We'll find out what it is.
Mm.
And we flew the ground with the EM survey because we got great results from our grab samples down at the gold showings. And so this big EM anomaly was a real surprise for us. But it's, it could be a company maker if it is what we think it is. But again, it's very early stage. So, a pragmatic explorer would say, look, you're drilling it to kill it. The promoter would say, look, this thing could be it's 5 kilometers long. It's maybe 30 to 50 meters wide. This could be a serious deposit. So somewhere in between. It's risky, but that's what we're in the game for.
Fair point. You always remain hopeful. There's no other way around in this industry. But good, it seems like this might be the year for Storm when things are starting to move. If the market is with you, that'd obviously be very nice for me as well. So yeah, thank you for this. So I don't think I have anything else to ask. What am I forgetting to ask you though?
I don't know. I think we've covered off all the salient points. Again, I think economic reconciliation falls to industry to lead with that. So yeah, I think this is a great topic of conversation for all exploration companies and for listeners to think about. It's certainly topical for the times.
Well, thank you very much, Bruce. Thank you for donating to this initiative. The young mining professionals appreciate it greatly. So thank you so much for this. All right, next up, and moving a little bit on the market cap spectrum, I have Dave O'Brien with me. He's the CEO of Stuhini Exploration, a molybdenum-focused company with multiple assets across Canada and one in the US. The company is listed on a TSX Ventures Exchange under the ticker symbol STU, where an average of about 55,000 shares trade each day with a 52-week high of 64 cents and a 52-week low of 18 cents. With a market cap of 8.5 million Canadian dollars and 46 million shares outstanding to date, this is an 18.5-cent stock, so not untypical for this market. Adding up options and warrants, that brings the number of fully diluted shares to 57.5 million. Eric Sprott, so the man himself, or Uncle Sprott, as we friends like to call him, he holds almost 40% of the shares. And Sprott Asset Management, as well as Middlefield, are among the bigger institutional investors in this story as well. As of the last interim financial statement, which is dated November 30th, the company had only, not only, because for this market cap, it's actually a lot of money. So it's $2 million on the current asset side of the balance sheet, mostly made up by actual cash, so $1.6 million in cash on that financial statement. And then on the current liability side of the balance sheet, they had about $100,000 with no long-term debt at all. As it always is, though, please go to the company's website as well as setterplus.ca and review the most up-to-date official filings because things do change and, most of all companies spend money. For Stuhini, the burn rate is rather low, actually, based on that last interim financial statement. And the company spent, on average, less than $50,000 a month on total expenses outside of exploration. So you can call it G&A. But that aside, boring stuff aside, I suppose, the company technically has 5 assets now, 4 of which are in Canada, including Manitoba, southeastern BC, northwestern BC, and the Yukon. And then there's one in the US as well, but the focus here for the company right now is northwestern BC, which is right on the border with the Yukon. Stuhini recently exercised its option and now owns 100% of the rights on what is a 31,000-hectare molybdenum exploration development project with a remaining 1% NSR on it. Rugby Creek, as the project is called, is not only a thesis anymore, and it hosts a molybdenum deposit of the same name, as well as multiple drill targets that Stuhini is hoping to test here in the future. Neatly summarized, we're talking about a 433 million pound pit-constrained molybdenum deposit in the measured and indicated category, and another 43.5 million pounds in the inferred category at a grade of, call it 0.05% on average. Again, though, this is a large land package. There are multiple other targets on here on this specific project. Like, for example, there's silver targets. There's even an orogenic gold target. But the focus for right now, again, is molybdenum, and the focus is on finding more molybdenum. Specifically at the Volcanic Creek target, where Stuhini recently did some groundwork and grab samples, showed them that there could be more molybdenum mineralization below the surface here, comparable to what they're seeing at Rugby Creek, because the rocks that they took back home had coarse rosettes and quartz veins and molybdenum veinlets in them, which is pretty much, again, what the rocks at the Rugby Creek deposit have. So that's what's the focus for 2024 will be, I assume, at least, and I intend on asking about that at the latter part of the conversation. But before we get to talking about that, Dave, I want to sort of hear your story, maybe from the get-go and from the time that you got involved in it, specifically focusing on how you've gone about your relationship with the First Nations on whose land you're operating right now. So take it away.
Well, thanks very much, Nick. It's a pleasure to be here. Just a minor correction. Our insider, we have 39.6 insider, which Sprott owns about 12.5%. He's one of the key insiders, but he doesn't own 39.5.
Oh, is that what I said? I thought, I said, yeah, because that's what I meant. Yeah, I was thinking of making the joke about Uncle Sprott, and that's why I got lost. But good point.
Yeah. The Ruby Creek project is located in Athlone, BC, and we're located in the unceded territory of the Taku River Tlingit First Nations. We're fortunate there's the only First Nations band that we would deal with. We're north of the Tahltan territory. The project is quite advanced and previously went into construction and was approved then. We're working with the Taku River. We also recognize UNDRIP, which is the UN Indigenous rights doctrine. So the project belonged to the co-founder for the first 5 years. The first 4 years will be optional. The co-founder has a very good relationship in Athlone. 4 years ago, we applied for our drill permits, and this is all done with the BC government, with the local first with the Taku River Tlingit, and we had no difficulty getting our drill permits. We now own the project 100%, and so formally, now that we own it, we've formalized our relationship with the Taku River Tlingit, and we're now probably going to form some committees and working with some of their associates and had meetings at Roundup recently. And we're very honored. They're an amazing First Nation. They're one of the gals, Charmaine, has a shirt that says it's hard to be Tlingit and be humble. They're very proud people and very interesting history. And they see the welcome mining of the community. We're not on the Tulsa River watershed. There's some issues on the lower Taku watershed with some of the Alaska drainage. We're more in the Yukon drainage. And our molybdenum project is located, probably 40 kilometers away from where the First Nations live, and it's quite remote. And compared to some of the work the placer operators have done in the area, so the devastation and moving the entire valleys, I think that an open pit mine won't be a big deal there. And it's also quite a clean project. It's a climax style deposit. It's quite clean and not very dirty. And all mining's dirty, but if you're going to build a pit, it's probably the cleanest you're going to build.
Mm. When you start doing exploration work, like walking the bush, as they call it, and whatnot, do you focus on employing a specific percentage of First Nation people, and what positions do they typically have?
Our co-founder did a lot of work working with them, and they were up until recently were fully employed. They're along with the placer operators, so there wasn't that much opportunity a few years ago. We haven't been doing much exploration the last couple of years, Antonio. Our project is very advanced, right? Shovel ready, went through feasibility. It's all drilled out. So this last year, for example, we did a desktop study of the previous EAC environmental assessment that was for the previous operator when it went into construction. And we work with the local First Nations, and we want their blessing and their approval, who we use, and as we move it forward. But right now, certainly, we're looking forward to signing. We'd like to move towards a memorandum of understanding so we can mutually benefit from the project. But we just received the project in the last year.
Right. Okay. Well, that's a good point. So that means that you're currently sort of again, I suppose, looking to initiate negotiations. How does that typically look like? Have you done it before, and how do you communicate with the First Nations there?
Well, we have a liaison right now with a young gal, and also very senior, just to the right of the spokespeople, the two clans run it. And what we'll do is we'll get a committee, and we'll look to a memorandum of understanding where we ensure that they get the right of first refusal on employment when applicable, and that they benefit from it, and empower decisions and all decisions going forward, make them in a form of pact. But we don't have a formal agreement yet. I've talked to some companies in the area that do have formal agreements, And again, they want us to be a little more specific in what we want to do. And right now, we're more or less looking for a partner. We're looking for to advance the project because it's a big project. It's pretty well shovel ready, and our market cap's not reflective of building a billion-dollar mine. So again, right now we're just preserving our cash and ensuring we have a very good relationship. I think we're very blessed to be dealing with them because they're very progressive and they're easy to get along with, and the understanding of the modern world, and we're understanding that as well.
Does that mean that you have, well, I suppose you have to contribute to the community in some shape or form? What does that mean for you specifically? Are there any costs associated with that or something else?
But once you get an agreement in place, it's typically a percentage of exploration sales. I know I believe 1 to 1.5%. I've talked to some other companies in the area of your exploration will go towards the First Nations community.
Right. Okay. And that's something that for you specifically, we're going to know more about once you sign that MOU.
Yeah, once we move towards that, again, we've had very good meetings. It's in progress right now, and it is a step-by-step type process. But they see all of our MD&As and they work with us. Again, we don't really do anything without their blessing, and it's what it has to be.
Right. Because that's also something that I've been wondering about is just generally like how do you, particularly if the land is being used for hunting and trapping and whatnot, how do you operate on that land without disturbing their normal way of life or their traditional values of using that land?
Again, you work with them. There was an issue, I think 4 or 5 years ago, where one of the trap lines might have been affected by our land, and one of our sort of employees went in and talked to them, and they realized that no, the trap line wasn't near where they thought it was. But certainly, they will point that out. They'll let you know if it were. We let them be aware of our plans, and if the plans in any way interfere, we'll deal with them on a case by case basis. That's how that works.
Right. Okay. Okay. Well, thank you, Dave, for the overview. I like hearing different stories and getting a better insight into how these things actually work on the ground. And talking of which, you said you've not been actively exploring this year, but you went to the volcanic creek zone. What exactly is going to be happening in 2024? Are you following up on that, or what is happening?
Yeah, in 2024. So now we now own the project. We have joined the International Molybdenum Association. Our chairman attended the meetings in Santiago, Chile. We were quite well received. That's where the big players are. The molybdenum space is a little bit of a different space. It's more the realm of the steel giants. It's not your typical commodity. It's a big commodity. It's a 630 million pound a year commodity. So we wanted to get our name known by the big players and big consumers. And I think we're very well received. They're surprised how large and advanced our project is. And also the big players, they're looking 10, 20, 30 years down the road. And they're looking for just a safe, reliable supply from a non-Banana Republic jurisdiction. And our project is road accessible. The ice-free seaport of Skagway, Alaska. Once you're in Atlin, our project's 14 kilometers from the edge of Atlin. And once you're in Atlin's paved highway to Skagway, Alaska, about 2.75 hour drive. So this year our plans are to get back up to Volcanic Creek, and we're considering doing some geophysics. And there's also at Ruby Creek there's hole 8417, which lies just outside the pit, which bottomed out in 46 meters of 0.23 MO, which is a very high grade. I mean, I believe if you look at Wikipedia, Henderson, the world's biggest underground project, is grades 0.2. So there might be an underground component. Again, the hole bottomed out. There was a 300 meter hole, 300 meters down, and it bottomed out in 46 meters of 0.23. Again, but it's difficult during these extremely difficult market conditions. It's tough to justify going and doing a drill program, or even, I believe the fact that we're pointing. There's a second porphyry nearby, 4 miles to the north, called Volcanic Creek. Placer drilled it back I believe in the early 80s. And this year we're on site and we're quite encouraged. We found a lot of visible molybdenite on surface. And some of this stuff was located up a kilometer away from where Placer had previously drilled. So it might be a bigger system. So probably for us, if we were to choose, the next phase of work would be to some geophysics on Volcanic Creek, trying to find some targets. And again, at the same time, look for a partner. We have to be realistic. A little $10 million company can't build a billion-dollar mine.
Yeah, it's true. What are you doing specifically to find that partner? You're inviting people. You're walking them around, or like how does that work?
Yeah, we are inviting people to come with the project, and we're introducing ourselves to companies, and we're back and forth to some of these companies as well, and even the bigger players that we're hoping they might be a little bit open-minded, right? Because I'm not a lot of the big players just aren't in the molybdenum space, but even the likes of I've talked to the likes of I don't be naming companies, some of the biggest companies in the world, and they're curious, and they've kind of hinted that our project's a little small. Like I think it's supposed to be 30,000 ton a day. I think they're sort of like 50,000 ton minimum. But the Ruby Creek deposit is open in three directions. It's open at depth, and Volcanic Creek is another nearby. But having satellite deposits in the area might change the economies of scale. I don't think we're that far away, and we're very attractive. So I think, well, fingers crossed.
Okay, but well, you don't spend too much money. They said less than 50 grand a month you spend on keeping the lights on, so you're gonna have enough money to keep the lights on for this year. But do you anticipate having to raise any money to complete geophysics, or can you do that on your own?
Oh, we can do that on our own right now. We have a 1.6. I believe our burn rate is more like 40,000 a month. And,
Okay.
when I look at our budgets, and that includes about $100,000 in marketing and paying our vice president exploration. We do run a very low cost operation, but we've had offerings that we'll probably use flow through. Like the money we have is all hard dollar, and hard dollar can be hard to come by. And when you have hard dollar, it's a lot easier to raise flow through, but it has to make sense, right? But we'll look to do some marketing this year, and it's very difficult market conditions. So the last finance we did was at 40 cents, and I want to upset a lot of people and start raising a lot of money at 20 cents. That's just what we don't want to do. But the markets are the markets. You have to do what you want to do. So we're evaluating that right now as we speak. We've got some opportunities, and again, it's on a day-by-day basis. But at this point in time, we're probably going to do some geophysics at Volcanic Creek, and probably hold back the drilling until it makes more sense, until we find a partner.
Okay, so drilling only if you find a partner, not necessarily if you find flow through money. You're not necessarily going back to that whole 80 40 17 4
Yeah, I think it's all market dependent. I mean, like for example, last year, the companies that spent their cash on exploration, they're up to trading at pennies. They're up against the wall, and they're in big trouble. And we took a very measured approach last year. We did spend about $450,000 between our projects, and again doing the desktop data review. And then a couple of times we got up to Volcanic Creek, and that was quite exciting for us. And we're at the recent show. We had some samples on our desk, and it's real the best rocks they'd seen. So again, you have to be very cognizant of the markets these days, and you just can't go diluting your stock at very, very low levels and being having aggressive plans. And we don't know when the markets are going to turn. I don't think we're too far away. The common sense is going to come back soon, and we all need these commodities. I mean, molybdenum is a critical metal. The World Bank pointed out as being part of the, I think, 7 of 9 green energy initiatives involved in. So it's exciting.
Yeah, with where molybdenum prices have been, though, that's less exciting and quite challenging, I suppose, to attract attention for. Would you be willing and able to put down some of your own money as you've done in the past, if it were needed to raise more capital to keep the lights on, say next year or whenever?
Oh, I've certainly got a lot of money invested. I think in 2022, my wife and I invested $185,000. I drew $24,000 salary. I've got a lot of my own money in obviously invested in the company. And of course, we're very fortunate because in addition to our 40% shareholdings, we got a base of about 25% of the shareholders have been there since the seed round. A lot of these people are fairly shrewd. They're well off. They look at this as a longer term asset. Again, the idea is we don't want to give this away. We have a very, very large resource. The previous operator had a market cap of, I'm told $300 million and an $800 million credit facility to go ahead and build it. And here we are sitting with their cash on hand with a $7 million enterprise value. So incredible opportunity for someone who likes molybdenum or base metals.
Right. Have you spoken to since you and I last spoke? Have you spoken to any of your larger investors like Eric Sprott or Sprott Asset Management or someone else? Because I'm just wondering. I know I think all of them are down on the stock. So I'm just wondering how they think about the stock and whether they're still a strong holder or maybe looking to put more money in.
I speak to Eric's colleagues, and I'm just setting up a meeting right now with Sprott Asset Management. But I believe everyone knows we're all in this resource game together. Myself, I'm an investor. My background is an investor, and I don't have to explain to people that our share price is low now. It's the same for everybody.
Yeah.
There's just no exception. So we're all aware of that situation. Some people have told me we're one of the better performers. I mean, certainly all of our seed people or IPO people that came in 5 years ago at 20 cents. We're still trading close to 20 cents, you know. And I'm not proud of that, but the markets are the markets. Are very, very difficult markets, right? And but again, you know, we got some people interested in buying our stock right now as well. You'll see some market activity is quite interesting. So you know, I can't really comment on that, but you know, I think we're near bottom at these levels. And what catalysts are moving forward is interesting to note. But again, we do have a very good base. If we need to raise money, we can tap that, and we can also raise money ourselves. But we're also looking now at American listing, and I'm looking right now as we speak to spend a little bit of time in the U.S. or introducing our story to the U.S. Now we have the U.S. listing as well, because at least they're not all, you know, blown up, and they're a little more receptive, and also understanding inflation. If you really want to protect yourself from inflation, you want hard assets. And if you look at the hard asset space, nothing's more attractive than resource. Or real estate in Canada has gone to the moon. It still is. Stock market generally very overvalued, and the base metals, the precious metals, and the resources are very inexpensive. You can't print copper, you can't print molybdenum, and you know, nothing's economic right now. You look at all these. There's dozens and dozens of copper porphyry projects in British Columbia that just $4 doesn't make sense. It might have made sense a few years ago, but the capital costs have gone up so much. We thought, well, you know, $20 moly, we thought were economic, and we realize right now that it's going to be the cost of building the mines have gone up a lot more, and the price of the commodities has gone up. So that's where there's just going to be no supply. As Robert Friedland recently stated, there has to be quite a dramatic move in the prices of these commodities. I mean, you know, the late 2000s, copper was 40 cents a pound. No one cared about it. Copper had to go to $4 a pound to bring on the next cycle. And right now at $4 a pound, the projects are lower grade, they're deeper, it's challenging, more political risky jurisdictions, more difficult metallurgy, higher altitude. So we need higher base metal prices to move the sector forward. Otherwise, there'll be no supply.
Got it. Yeah. Well, it's interesting where it's all going, and when the government's really gonna start acknowledging it, not more because they've woken up to it. But when are they gonna actually start acknowledging it? I'm hearing some chatter about potentially speeding up timelines and so on and so forth, and giving grants and so on and so forth. We saw it happen with lithium, so it'd be interesting to see where it goes. There's been a good update, Dave. I don't think I have too many other questions. Things are moving forward slowly, so I appreciate the update. What am I forgetting to ask you here?
Well, I think that's everything, Antonio. I really appreciate your time. Yeah, again, it is exciting for us. I mean, we're sitting on a big resource. We're quite unusual. Very few juniors will sit on a large asset like that. It's all measured and indicated. The road was built. You know, the road upgrade. I think Ledcor did the road upgrade in 2006 and 7. It was 23 million back then from a sort of a Forest Service road to what you could call a haul road, and it's ready to go. And it's a very interesting commodity. Last year, the price of molybdenum went up. The molybdenum consumption went up 3% from 609 to 630 million pounds. World Bank projects it'll be a £1 billion a year market by 2050. It's growing quite rapidly, and there's not a lot of opportunities. We have a sort of an unusual climax style pure play deposit. It's not a copper byproduct. And one of our big challenges as well is to teach people about molybdenum and how useful it is and how common it is. And for, you know, obviously it's a key steel additive.
Thank you again, Dave. Thank you very much for the overview, and thank you very much for donating to the young mining professionals. I know they appreciate it too. So yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
All right, next up, moving up the market cap again, I have a public favorite with me, Brandon McDonald. He's the CEO of Fireweed Metals, a zinc and tungsten. That might be a new material right there. Zinc and tungsten developer with a splash of rare earths, lead, and silver potentially. Companies listed on the TSX Ventures Exchange under the ticker symbol FWZ, where an average of about 130,000 shares trade each day, with a 52-week high of $1.77 and a 52-week low of 77 cents without the dollar, I suppose. With a market cap of 155 million Canadian dollars and 146 million shares outstanding today, this is a $1.06 stock. Adding up options and warrants, of which there aren't all that many, that brings up the number of fully diluted shares to about 164 million, that is. Tightly held those shares are, though, with some big names on the registry, including, of course, the Lundin Family Trust, which owns almost a fifth of the company, not quite a fifth, so 19.7% to be specific. Larry Childress, who owns over 13%. Tech Resources is written down for 8.3%. Ibera Capital controls 6.8%, and another 6% is in the hands of the board and management, leaving a bit over 46% in the hands of retail and other institutions and other investors. As of the last interim financial statement, which is dated September 30th, the company had nearly $32 million on the current asset side of the balance sheet, mostly made up by $30 million of cash and cash equivalents. And on the current liability side of the balance sheet, they had about $7 million, mostly in the form of account payables, with a rather insignificant long-term lease liability residing on the non-current liability side of the balance sheet. As it always says, though, please go to the company's website as well as setterplus.ca to review the most up-to-date official filings, financials, and whatnot. By the time you're watching this, things are going to be, keeping lights on and being an active company costs money, especially if you also have to keep the heating on up there in the Yukon. For Fireweed, the total cash burn based on that last interim financial statement was an average of about $460,000 a month. Boring stuff aside, though, the bread and butter for Fireweed is the MacPass and Mactung zinc tungsten combo up in the Yukon. As I mentioned, they have a lot of land up there, and this project is no exception. So it's spanning over 950,000 square kilometers. And the tagline or the sales pitch here for Brandon is rather simple, because McMillian Pass, or again MacPass as we friends like to call it, is one of the world's largest undeveloped zinc projects. There's 11.2 million tons of 6.6% zinc and 2.5% lead and over 21 grams per ton of silver, resulting in a zinc equivalent grade of 9.6%, which at today's prices, just to give you an idea, although I know I'm not supposed to do that, about $200 to $250 rock, depending on how you want to make that calculation. Most of the tonnage is in the inferred category, though, where I see almost 40 million tons at 10% zinc equivalent, with a 2018 PEA showing an 18-year life of mine, and a bunch of other numbers which are probably no longer as relevant after the inflationary period of the last couple of years, which is also why Fireweed wants to redo all that by 2025. But there's also a bunch of advantages that have happened since, like, for example, $71 million government funding that is not included in that PEA, as well as a lot of drilling, all of which is expected to be included in that upcoming PEA. Then there's the Mactung project, another easy tagline, or maybe even easier than the previous one, because this the words "one of" are just missing here, meaning this is simply the world's largest high-grade tungsten deposit. This is right next to the zinc project MacPass, and that's why we call it a MacPass combo, basically. And its 2023 resource estimate showed 41.5 million tons of 0.73% tungsten in the indicated category by combining an open pit and an underground combo deposit, and then another 12.25 million tons at 0.6% tungsten in the inferred category, again in the same setting, an open pit dash underground setting, with the majority being mineable underground for both categories, by the way. And if you've never heard of tungsten, by the way, then that's because almost nobody in the West produces any of it. China basically controls almost 90% or something along those lines of the production. So the hope here is that Western governments will eventually warm up to the fact that they need deposits like Mactung, which is, of course, not an easy feat for them to wake up to it. But according to Fireweed, given proper financing, this thing could be in production before the end of the decade. And then lastly, Fireweed also has an exploration project, not in the Yukon, but close to it, about 180 kilometers to the northeast from MacPass, so in the Northwestern Territories then technically. And according to recent geophysics, rock, and soil samples, there are multiple germanium, gallium, zinc, and lead exploration targets over there. That's about as good of a summary as I can give in, about 5 minutes or something, so which I hope we can touch upon all these things later on in the conversation, Brandon. But I want to pick it up from the First Nations point of view, because that's the focus here today, and all of your projects are within traditional territories of different First Nations. So it's story time, I suppose. But how did you first engage with the First Nations there when you were staking your projects? What did the process look like?
Yeah, it was MacPass that we acquired originally, and I would note that it's 950 square kilometers, not 950,000 square kilometers. 950,000
Is that
would
what I
be,
said? I'm not on my
yeah,
game today. Yeah.
that is a very, that's like, I don't know, most of the Yukon or something like that. I'm not sure, but um, yeah, so we acquired the core of it from Hud Bay.
Hmm.
And that when that transaction occurred, immediately introduced ourselves to the First Nations, or perhaps reintroduced ourselves. As it happened, the nearest community to Mac Pass and by extension Mac Tongue is the community of Ross River, which is the home of the Ross River Dena Council, which is a Kaska First Nation. Um, that happened to be where I lived as a small child. So my family was in the exploration business. I lived in that community from when I was basically born till when I was 5. In total, my family was there for about 13, 14 years, I believe. Um, so a lot of work had been done there. I had gone back as a teenager. My first jobs in the industry were, working for my old man and staking claims with him and doing soil sampling programs, again, in the Ross River area. So I had friends there, and I had, mentors there who helped me out in the industry, and friends of my fathers and mothers and family. Um, so it was good when we reintroduced ourselves to them. There was some immediate familiarity, and I think some comfort with each other. As I've put it, like having a pre-existing relationship doesn't give you a free pass, right? But what it does give you, I think, is very open dialogue, right? Which I think is probably the first step to, a productive and collaborative relationship, is the ability to have an open and constructive and honest dialogue, right?
Hmm. In your case, is the land particularly being used for hunting and trapping? All of it, most of it, half it? How's that work?
Yeah, there's not a lot of hunting really within the limits of our property. It's not there's wildlife everywhere in Yukon. Like, let's be clear, that you'd be hard pressed, certainly in the sort of eastern side of Yukon where we are, you'd be hard pressed to find somewhere that there isn't caribou. There's always some wandering around, right? I think what you're paying attention to is whether it's particularly fruitful for hunting, whether there's some what you would call a wildlife key area, which would be where the animals rut, which is the mating, where they're calving, like giving birth, winter range, and the winter range is the limited areas where there's still exposed foliage during winter so that they can graze in winter. This is not surprisingly, and somewhere as cold as the Yukon, that's not most places. So in terms of wildlife, those wildlife key areas tends to be where you get accumulations of wildlife at certain times of year. We don't really see that in our project, but the road to our project is frequently used by Indigenous and non-Indigenous hunters to get to areas that are, good for hunting, right? And that's something that we always have to manage in terms of access.
Well, that's exactly where I want to go with this, because that's what I'm trying to figure out here today is, but like how do you operate? How do you manage the land without disturbing their normal way of life, which if you're not like how would they go about their life if you were not there, and how do they go about their life now that you are there, basically is what I'm asking.
Yeah, I guess the road to our project was put in during the Second World War, actually by the American Army, to facilitate a pipeline through there, an oil pipeline, still usable now. And to that degree, it's given Indigenous hunters access to their traditional territory on their side by side or truck, etc., instead of having to go on foot, which is pretty difficult to drag an animal carcass far on foot, right? Um, the challenge is it also opens it up to non-Indigenous hunters as well. And this is there's direct impact of exploration work and then subsequently mining, which is that you have a camp and an operation, a drill site or a mine. Um, you're gonna be scaring animals away from there. They're not going to particularly be interested in hanging around with the noise and the ruckus and the vehicles and stuff like that, right? So you can disturb traditional areas. You can impact migratory patterns, etc. Right? So this is something the direct impacts you have to manage. Then there's the indirect impacts, right? Which is to say that if you build a road to your project, um, or build an internal roads in your project, you're opening it up to hunting, whether you want to or not. Now, the laws in Yukon have up to this point required that if you have a road that's connected to the public highway system, everyone gets to use it. Now, the challenge for that, for a junior mining company or any mining company, is that you're building an access road to your exploration project or your mine. You don't really want anyone else using it, quite honestly, right? It's your road. You don't want the safety concerns. You don't want people with guns on your property. But that's not the way the law works. It's very much, well, if you build a road, everyone should be allowed to use it under the traditional way the law had worked until very recently. So the challenge became that the burden of hunting impacts, increased hunting impacts, fell on mining companies when quite honestly it wasn't us shooting the animals, right? But we're creating these roads into pristine wilderness, which particularly, that the Indigenous frustrations with non-Indigenous hunters who then go take these brand new roads into pristine wilderness and have access, to hunt there and further threaten maybe herds that have already been, significantly had population reductions. So this is, frustrating for us because, my personal feeling is if my mining project is going to fail in terms of not get consent of the First Nations, then it should not get consent because the project's not up to snuff. But I can't prove that I don't impact, Indigenous rights and title through impact to wildlife, et cetera. What's frustrating is that a project can fail not because of the project's impacts, but because of the secondary impacts of the road. Now, the good news is that there's new legislation coming in Yukon, these resource road regulations that are going to allow for truly private roads, which means that I can build the road to my mine, the internal roads on my claims, et cetera, and I can gate it. I can control access. People can be fined for using it, right? And that goes a long way. It's something that this is a win-win-win because the government, quite honestly, wants it. The mining companies want it and the First Nations want it, right? So that it's taken this long to happen is disappointing, but at least it's happening, right? So we expect the broad strokes legislation has been passed already and the fine print is being, written now. So that's something that, that we have to carefully manage, right? It's not just direct impacts, it's secondary impacts.
I'm happy you mentioned there that's something that the First Nations too want, because I was going to ask, like, did you have to consult with them? Isn't that going to disturb maybe even more of their lands, putting up a road that they are not allowed to use or something along those lines?
Well, you can, if I build an internal road, and it's under the new resource road regulations such that I'm allowed to control access, I can open it up to Indigenous hunters, but restrict it to non-Indigenous, right? That's at that point, that's my decision, right? So,
Okay.
that's hopefully allows for some collaboration, and we'd also look to engage local Indigenous land guardians to control that access and to control the gate, right? Allow them to monitor and control and patrol the road, right? I think that's an opportunity for them. It gets them working on the land. I think it's something they'd like to do.
Right. Okay. How often do you have to consult, by the way, when you're making decisions like these? How often do you have to consult with the people there?
Yeah, I mean, consultation is continuous. That doesn't mean you necessarily are consulting every day, but it's we go through periods where we have a permit in place and we're not changing the permit. It's kind of the status quo, same as last year. We might talk to chief and council once every 3 months, maybe even once every 6 months, right? If there's not particularly anything to manage. If we're dealing with a new permit application or an upcoming permit application, particularly where we want their buy-in, maybe even consent on a particular design component of this permit, it could be pretty regular, right? You can be talking, you can have a couple of meetings a month, depending on, not always with chief and council, but with the lands office or the development corporation or something like that. So this sort of social license, even when you get to like through those major gates and it goes to a quiet period, it still has to, you earn that social license every day, right? And through that engagement and through action, being true to your word.
Right. Do you set budgets for those consultations or for just, I don't know, relationship budgets for the First Nations or something like that?
Oh, absolutely. Right. I mean, we're a very budget driven company. We don't raise money and then just spend until it's out. We every time we raise money, which I mean, look, to be clear, in a lot of junior mining companies, and particularly in capital constrained times as we are now, would do what I would call an availability based budget, which is that you think you can raise 5 million. You think your next window to raise is next year. So you budget about 5 million, maybe you do 4.5 million or something like that. And so your budget is based on what you have available to you. And you just try to make sure you don't overspend. We're now luckily that we're in what I would consider an objective-based budgeting process where we look at what we want to accomplish for the year, do a workup of how much that's going to cost, and then raise the capital to achieve that. And always as a part of that, always is Indigenous engagement, agreement negotiation, all these sort of things, right? Community events, charitable donations, scholarships, and all sorts of things, right? So this is all part of what we budget, and that this is a key part of our budget.
Right. Okay. Well, so this donation specifically is then part of that budget as well.
Yeah, I mean, it'd be under somewhere. I'm probably going to put this under my marketing budget as opposed to my community, but I mean, 6 of one, half dozen of another, right?
Right. How much money are you budgeting for First Nations relationships? And also what I'm wondering, where I'm coming from with this is I'm trying to understand what that accomplishes for the communities. Like where does the money go and what percentage of that really benefits the community and in what way?
Well, it's hard to nail down what we budget for that because there are some things that are not strictly budgeted for community, Indigenous engagement, but things like if I source all my fuel from the local development corporation, which is Indigenous owned, which is what we do, that's a big ticket item, right? That's what's one of our biggest ticket items. Is that community engagement? No, I know I'm buying fuel. I need fuel, right? Mm-hmm. But and they deliver it well. They're a good service provider. The price is fair. But that's something that is both, right? Like we're building capacity with the community. We're engaging in constructive relationship building and business building with them. So we do a lot of that, like almost half or maybe just over half, depending on what year of our business on site goes through Indigenous owned or partnered companies. Groceries, fuel, sometimes our drilling contractors. They own, that lease expense you mentioned out of our financials is that the Indigenous Development Corp owns our camp and we lease it from them, right? So they bought it and then lease it to us. That's kind of a win-win because I don't have to put the money up front, and then they've got this kind of and annuity out of it, right? As we pay them for the camp, with a profit margin built in. So it ends up being a win for everyone. So, the direct stuff for community, just I don't know, it's not it's material with the budget the size of ours. But it's not like, it's not a huge percentage of the direct budget when you exclude the stuff that's like the business through their development corp.
Right. You also try to employ locals as much as possible. You have 308, I believe I read today, 308 employed people. What percentage is First Nations?
Now I want to say we had about 50 First Nation employees last year. Mm-hmm. Now we don't have 300 people in camp at all times. We had about 100-person limit, but you've got cross shifts and you've got some people who come in periodically for one specific item. They might be in and out in a day every 2 weeks or something like that, right? So it's 308 people that came through camp total last year to do work. So that it was our most ever in terms of Indigenous employees, it made us the largest employer in Ross River, which I think is a great achievement. We hosted a dinner in Ross River in December and had over 100 people show up, which was the largest gathering in the community for some time. So it's that employment, one, it's immediately providing benefits and jobs. It's unfortunately this, for us at the life cycle we're at, it's seasonal work, right? So we're not able to provide a huge amount of year-round work, but it's good work. It's good pay. We see opportunities. We've promoted a bunch of people internally. We've offered training for a whole bunch of people. We offer first aid courses, et cetera, and stuff like that in the community. And eventually what you have to think about for a company like us is long-term needs analysis of the sort of skills you're going to need when you're an operating mine. As you pointed out, Mactung could quite readily, I think, be producing within this decade, and MacPass is just a little bit after that. So you've got some long lead time, but when you think about, you might want engineers and geologists and all these, sort of people and surveyors and haul truck drivers and stuff like that. So you got to think about what training do you need to gauge in when to make sure the community is ready for the jobs when you're offering them.
Is that something you directly have an influence of? Like, how do you solve that? Because let me tell you where I'm coming from with this is, as far as I understand it, typically the jobs that First Nations have within those companies are laborers or technicians, and not typically represented by the geologist, for example, or anything within earth sciences, which is one of the main reasons why I'm doing this. So how do you, as a company, make sure that they are represented more at those higher levels, if you will?
Yeah, I think you look at, there's a couple of ways to look at it. You look at it, okay, what are the mine specific skills that we could possibly offer a scholarship for someone to get? Also the generalist skills, and I mean, or industry agnostic skills that a mine uses, right? Like every mine still needs all sorts of skills that you also see at jobs that are not mines, right? And so that this is the balance between, depending on your mine life, we're looking at two very long mine life assets. So it's a little bit different for us. But if you've got a short mine life, and you may be the only mine advanced project within a traditional territory, convincing a bunch of First Nations to go out and get, their, metallurgical engineering degree to work as a metallurgical engineer for 10 years and then not have any job after that is not, maybe not the greatest outcome. So there's that balance between, you definitely want them to be able to, as quick as possible, be working in more senior management level roles. And then, hopefully if you've got ultra long mine life assets like we do, where you're not talking about 10, 15 year mine lives, but 25, 30, 40, 50 year mine lives. Well, what's stopping that the foreman or the general manager, et cetera, are eventually, why can't they be Indigenous? You got plenty of time to train people, right? And they can have their entire career there, right? So that's why you really got to think long range on what skills exist within the community, what skills do you need, then working with them and with consultation with them of the skills you need, which ones do they want to do, which ones do they see most portable and beneficial to them over their life, right? So it may not always be the niche mining stuff, the geology, the mining engineering, the metallurgy, stuff like that, right? So it's an extremely complex area which people have built out their entire careers on this kind of capacity planning, right?
Right. And so with those efforts that you're telling me about here, what's the result of that being? As in, how are the communities accepting you there? Do they want you to be there? And yeah, what's the general vibe, if you want to be a Gen Z about it?
Yeah, it's I think you have to appreciate that there's always mixed feelings within a community, and you have to respect that. Everyone has different viewpoints personal experiences, desires and expectations. And so you're not, and I'm not saying this in kind of a defeatist way. I'm saying in more of it being a pragmatic, that you're not going to have everyone on the community on board, right? Everyone on the spectrum of economic opportunity to environmental protection, there's going to be people who skew to one side or the other, right? Now, it's obviously our responsibility to show that there's little to no compromise in environmental protection, proceeding with this mine, right? That the risks are all small and manageable, and that we intend to have best in class, tailings management closure, walk away sort of closure, not 100 years of monitoring and that sort of stuff.
Right.
And you're coming up against the legacy of other operations. Near the town of Ross River is the old Faro mine, perhaps one of the biggest environmental cleanups in Canada. I am hearing a $1 to $2 billion price tag for cleaning that up.
Wow.
The First Nations, not surprisingly, not terribly thrilled about the legacy of that operation. When it was built, we didn't know what we know now about acid rock drainage and all these other problems, right? But that's that's how it was done, and that's the legacy it's left, right? And so you can see why a lot of locals, and this is actually, I'll tell you straight up, they put it to us. The lands office of one of the First Nations pointed out that in their traditional territory, there have been 5 mines. One of the 5 had been shut down gracefully and closed properly. The other 4 failed ungracefully and left behind messes. So he made the point of like, look, we're here engaging you in good faith. But you need to understand that it's our lived experience that there's an 80% chance if you build a mine that you're going to fail and leave behind a mess. Right. And so you can talk about, well, we do things differently now, that there's better design, better bonding, et cetera, et cetera. And they'll say, sure, but that's still not our experience. Right. So that this is the burden of modern mining companies to say, like, to acknowledge the kind of sins of our predecessors in this industry and come up with better designs, and work with the community, convince them that these designs are in fact better and that we are in fact going to be different. And then when we say we're being different, it's not just talk, right? It means something.
Yeah. And it's not only for the Indigenous groups there, it's actually important for your investors too. Because it directly influences us, and them stopping the process, something along those lines can be a direct cost to your investors. And maybe that might be a good point or a good question here, is like, if I put my investor hat on for a moment, when I'm looking into to invest into a company that operates within the traditional territories of a First Nations, what are red flags that tell me to maybe avoid that specific company because of how they treat the peoples? What would you classify as red flags?
The hard thing is that you're, as an investor, you don't get to be in the room with the company talking with the First Nations, so you don't really know what that relationship is like, right? The company could talk a very good game and be secretly failing behind the scenes to consult and get consent on their project. On the other hand, they can also be very quiet about it, for all sorts of reasons, because sometimes you don't want to, it's very risky, declaring that you have this great relationship with the First Nations if they don't necessarily feel the same way, right? So sometimes the quieter approach and just not talking about it, respecting them, and that they don't want to be used as a promotional tool for you to raise money, right? So that maybe you don't necessarily talk about it. So you might think, well, these guys never mention their First Nations relationships, and there must be something wrong there. It's like, no, or maybe they're respecting the First Nations and not talking about it, right? So it is a very difficult thing, very difficult for investors to know about, right? So you kind of, talk to the talk to management, ask them questions about it. If they're dismissive about it, as many of the kind of cowboys in this industry are, odds are they're not doing a good job, right? You know, if they're saying things like, well, you know, we do what we got to do, or like, oh, the First Nations are, you know, being a pain in the ass, but we got it under control, or whatever. They're talking about this stuff, which is so common amongst the old school cowboys of this industry who just are used to a different era of not needing social license. That is typically a disaster waiting to happen, right? So ask them about it and see, you know, judge whether you feel they're sincere about their desire to have positive relationship and a positive impact.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't feel they're truly sincere about it, it's probably a disaster waiting to happen.
So
Maybe not,
how
right?
they
But
answer how they answer those questions is more important than the question itself.
yeah, well, it's more important. It's like the tone of the answer rather than the specific verbiage of the answer, right? And then and again, that's tough, right? So, but I think a lot of people, you'll be able to tell the sincerity and passion they have for this. A lot of people you will pretty easily be able to tell how dismissive they are about the need to do this, right? That it's they feel put upon that they have to engage now than they didn't have to before, right? Those kind of attitudes are great leading indicators of potential problems, or leading indicator that things are going to go well, right?
Right. Okay. Well, thank you, Brandon, for this overview of how you go about your business with the First Nations. I appreciate your tone of voice. Wish more companies did it like you, and hopefully I can stop by one day and see exactly how it all goes down on the ground. I think that's also telling oftentimes. Um, let's actually talk about that, the going down portion, not me inviting myself to a site visit, but maybe one day, who knows?
We'll get you
Because
there. We'll get you there. Don't worry.
it's where I'm coming from with this, because I read something, as sort of a remark or an objection, if you will, that I came across online when looking into Fireweed, and it was something along the lines of these guys already did what they could have done. They had a record in 2023, record year, raised a bunch of money, drilled what they drilled, but the best times are behind them, if you will. And that's an interesting claim here that I have a feeling you'll disagree with. But I also know that the Lassonde curve will then disagree with you, given that you're planning to enter the PEA stage for 2025. So given that operationally, again, at least into 2023 was a large success, what are you doing to ensure that 2024 will also have a chance of matching or surpassing 2023?
Yeah, first I wouldn't, we had our best ever drill results for the third year running. I mean, I guess you could say, well, can they do it for a fourth year running?
Yeah.
I wouldn't bet against my team, the geologists on my team. And ultimately, does it, like, maybe we don't have our top ever drill results, but I would remind people that for us, drill results that are in our top 50 still smash basically every other zinc project globally. Smash it, right? Like, just no hope for the vast majority of projects to keep up with those quality of drill holes. So I'm not super concerned whether or not every hole is the best ever, right? And I think in terms of, I would also note that, like, this project was originally the Tom deposit. That was the 50s. Then in the 70s, Tom East, Tom Southeast, that was, West was originally found, were discovered. Jason was discovered. Boundary was kind of discovered in the 70s and 80s, but it really took us to 2020 to find the meat on that bone, right? There is a lot of room left to explore here, and a lot of potential, huge amount of potential. We know these styles of systems produce numerous deposits along a linear trend. We see that at Faro, Howard's Pass, other such deposits similar to that, like Red Dog, etc. Right? So there's going to be more there. Now, as to the Lassonde curve, the Lassonde curve is a great conceptual thing. For most companies, it doesn't play out that way. For most companies, we know the success rate is low, right? So for most companies, the Lassonde curve plays out like discovery down, and it just never comes back up because the deposit is not viable, right? So you get some initial excitement out of some drill holes, and then it becomes apparent that this project's going nowhere, and it's like it's not a Lassonde curve, it's a Lassonde bump. Like you go up and you're down, and that's it, you're done. But there are tons of projects and companies that have bucked the Lassonde curve, right? Great Bear, Arizona Metals, or Mining, sorry, Adriatic, all these companies that were like, what Lassonde curve, right? So I think quality projects, particularly as they get to that mature stage, start attracting institutional capital that they couldn't before, and that can carry the story quite readily. I don't get kept up at night about the Lassonde curve. I'm not worried about losing the excitement of sexy needle moving drill holes. Because first off, I think we'll have those needle moving drill holes for some time, but also that I think the development story and eventual construction and production story is exciting enough into itself. And also, if you believe we're a takeout candidate, which I think is pretty reasonable thing to consider when you look at the absolute dearth of quality zinc projects, development projects, and how incredibly bad the zinc supply situation is going to be in 8 to 10 years with so many major mines shutting down. That kind of competitive tension and M&A tension can be a much bigger driver than those old drill results ever were, right? So not super concerned. We have the great backers behind us that ensure that we can build this if we want to. It's going to be, we got 2 projects, which there are no certainties in life and certainly not in mining, but they certainly look like they're going to be mines, right? And good ones. So I think we're in a pretty good position. I'm not worried about everyone losing interest.
But you make a good point, because this thing keeps going. Wherever you drill it, you have good intercepts, basically. Almost to a point where the market doesn't seem to react to it as much as it would have, let's say, 2 or 3 years ago, or at all. So it's kind of like, okay, it's high grade. What else is new? So, and you make a good point. If this is a takeover target, how much more do you think you're going to have to drill this before you go and actively start looking for a buyer?
Yeah, I think that people have asked me, what do you need to do to get so-and-so to buy you?
Yeah, exactly.
There's things that we can do that help. Additional de-risking. The asset's bigger, corporates are not immune to FOMO. Let's be clear, right? Like they're not. That FOMO drove the South 32 takeout of Arizona mining, right? And I think we look at the recent economics out of that, and that does not reflect well necessarily in hindsight. But it's driven by FOMO. So getting bigger helps. De-risking it helps. Progress towards or at receipt of permits helps, right? That makes, whoever the buyer is, they know that it's nearer term or easier for them to get, underway to construction. But the biggest thing is going to be they need a mandate to buy. Right now, I have little doubt, and you have to think about put your CEO of base metals X hat on. You're some big mid-tier major base metals CEO. You're getting phone calls from BlackRock and Fidelity and all these major funds that own you, and they're telling you, rationalize your portfolio, cut costs, show margin improvement, yada yada yada, right? Because the market sucks. Then the bull market comes, and those same PMs out of the same funds are phoning you and saying, where's your growth? Show me resource growth. Show me a pipeline. Show me this, right? And suddenly now the CEO is like, oh my God, I got to show growth or I'm going to get tossed out. So they're pressuring now their corp dev team is getting pressure from the CEO, is getting pressure instead of selling assets to rationalize the portfolio, is getting pressure to buy assets to show a growth pipeline. So can there be M&A outside that kind of mania? Absolutely. But when that mania comes, make no mistake, like those corp dev departments start scrambling and are under a huge amount of pressure to make deals happen, right? And I just really think the zinc project in particular, if you got a company that's in the zinc business and they're told like, they'll go find us a high margin base metals project, and maybe because they're integrated, because they have smelters as well, like a Glencore, Boliden, or Teck or whatever, and they want a zinc asset. Not many out there like us, maybe none out there like us that are greenfield, right? So feel pretty good. So I like there's things I can do and I am doing,
Right.
but part of it's patience and try not to force it, right? Like going out and trying to do a soft or hard process on the company now could very well fail, and of course the whole street knows when that happens, right? And everyone's like, oh my God, Fireweed tried to sell Mac Pass and couldn't get a bidder, and everyone thinks it's a disaster, and as a result, when in fact it was just a dumb time to do it, right? So we're not doing anything like that. We're not always keeping my always receptive, but at the same time, we're not trying to force anything now. It's just not the right market to try to force anything.
Right.
We make it better, make it easier, make sure we have the relationships, and then when the time is right, yeah, then maybe you give a little push.
And that was exactly the question, right? When is the time right? Because you go into PEA or then potentially PFS or whatever, those are expensive steps. In terms of dilution, I'm not doubting your capabilities of raising capital. You've proven that's not an issue so far. So, but there's still major capital expenditures, right? That you have to get. So when is that time? When do you think that right time is going to come?
Yeah, look, every M&A is unique, right? Has its own set of imperatives and situations, stuff like that. But our own research has shown that base metals M&A, pre-production base metals M&A, like a junior getting bought for significant amounts, like north of 200-300 million, is extremely rare to basically almost never happening if they don't have a PFS or a permit, or maybe both, right? So it's could Fireweed buck the trend? Be one of the few outliers that manages to transact without those? Yeah, possibly, right? But all evidence seems to suggest that is a good thing to have to make the transaction easier.
Fair enough. Oh, that's a fair point. You still have some results, by the way, that I wanted to ask you about. I believe in the lab,
Sure.
right? When's that coming out?
No, all results are out for the year.
Okay, then I'm missing something.
Yeah, no, we had the last results from Tom and Jason out a couple weeks ago, something like that. So
Okay.
we are done for the year, finally. So the resource update for MacPass is underway. They've got everything they need. We're doing the early stages of that now. I've signaled Q2. It's going to take some time. It's because it's not one deposit, right? It's 4 deposits each, which has multiple zones. So the modeling for this is non-trivial, and the iterations take time. But yeah, we're expecting Q2 for that.
Q2 for okay, good. Yeah. When does drilling starts in the summer over there? What is that going to mean for you specifically this year?
May, June. I expect a
That's
drill
pretty
program
early.
about yeah, I mean, yeah, June is where we traditionally start. We left drills on site over winter. So we're ready to go pretty early. And we put in a big new camp last year, which was a thing we'd left for a long time because our old camp, which we'd inherited, the people who put it in and all their wisdom had put it in an avalanche zone. So that kind of limited our early season options because you couldn't really, which just wasn't safe in camp, right? So now we have this new camp, so we can get in a bit earlier.
Okay.
So TBD exactly when we go in. But like I said, we'd expect a program about as big as last year.
Okay. How many? Just the same number of drills as last year, then I assume.
If 5, I think 4 or 5. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Where are they going specifically? You said multiple zones, multiple targets.
Yeah, I look, there'll be a bunch at Boundary again, Tom as well, maybe a couple holes at Jason. We hit on 100% of our step outs last year, so clearly not yet fully nailed down the edges of the system. So just need to kind of, which is good. right? I mean, we'll eventually find the limits of Boundary and Tom and Jason and stuff like that, but we're not there yet.
Right.
So I think, more step outs, maybe some infill. But really you know, we're not trying to get that, progressive or infill for PFS just yet. But we do want to kind of highlight some infill in areas that we think needs it, like that they have high degree of economic importance, while maybe still a high degree of geological uncertainty, right? So that probably makes sense to do some infill there. And most importantly, we're going to do a bunch of exploration this year. So both generative work, geophysics, mapping, soils, etc. And then also we'll test some new targets, at least 2, but I hope up to 4 new targets this year as well.
I'm looking at that last news release, and silver grades are really picking up at Tom South, actually.
Yeah.
Do you expect that to keep happening in that part of the asset? And do they have to be picking up for your thesis to check out, or is this sort of a surprise?
Well, no. I mean, Tom and Jason in particular, as you get feeder textures and proximal, the lead and silver goes up quite a bit. The silver very, very closely related to the lead. So those numbers not surprising. The highest grade parts of Tom, like Tom Southeast, can have 400 or 500 grams silver per ton, and same with Jason South. The highest grade parts of that are very similar to that as well, right? So this is not really surprising. We don't average that, but when you get into the real juicy bits, that's entirely achievable.
Right. Okay. I know I have to let you go almost here because I want to be respectful for your time. What else is happening? Are you going to Guyana this year, or is it not planned?
We don't know. We have to make sure it's permitted to do what we want. We have to make sure the targets are ready. We have to do ultimately a decision of the relative merits of drilling Guyana versus additional drilling at Mac Pass. And we're just not there. We just haven't made a decision on that yet. Love the targets there. A high threshold to success given the remoteness, right? So just want to make sure that we're not making decisions driven by our love of the geology rather than the actual economic prospects of it, right? So this kind of rigorous decision making is core to how Fireweed operates.
It's also money consideration, I suppose, too. But I believe you're going to have enough money to finish. What do you have in the bank right now?
15.
Okay. Is that enough money to finish the drill program?
No, but we'll be opportunistic as and when, if we want to top up and get the drill program we want. It's nice. I tell you, as a junior mining CEO, to know that you can get the money always is a good position to be in.
Yeah,
if we have to, we'll do a financing like we did last time, which was existing shareholders only. And that's, this is a incredible entry point for investors. So I don't see any particular reason to be charitable to someone who hasn't bought shares in the market.
That's a strong opinion, a strong stance. Are you any other ways of financing, like streams on the silver that we just talked about, is something that you can use as alternatives?
Yeah, we could get a massive amount of money for a silver stream on our project. Come construction, they prefer to be the last money in. Selling a silver stream now is likely to impair the asset without giving us the kind of money we want. Is it technically less dilution than equity? Sure, but equity doesn't impair an asset, right? It's dilutive, but it does not impair it. So it is the simplest. So I think for the time being, it's going to be an equity thing.
Fair enough. All right, thank you, Brandon, for the overview. I guess I'll let you do your job now, as I'll be moving on to one of your neighbors, if there really is such a thing in the Yukon. That's going to be Snowline Gold Corp. That's the next company in the lineup today. This is a gold exploration company with a couple of assets in the Yukon. Companies listed on TSX Ventures Exchange under the ticker symbol SGD, where an average of about 80,000 shares trade each day, with a 52-week high of $6.40 and a 52-week low of $2.14. With a market cap of 800 million Canadian dollars and 147 million shares outstanding today, this is a $5.45 stock. There are 10 million options and 6.4 million warrants, resulting in about 160 4 million fully diluted shares. Almost 60% of those shares are in the hands of institutional investors, strategic investors like B2 Gold, for example, which holds 9.9%, or management, which holds 8% of the company. As of the last interim financial statement, which is dated September 30, the company had just shy of $40 million in cash and cash equivalents and $3.8 million of account payables, with no long-term debt outside of a small lease liability and a deferred acquisition payment. Same thing as before, though. Please go to the company's website as well as setterplus.ca to review the most up-to-date financial data by the time you're watching this, because Snowline is an active company and no business runs for free, unfortunately. For Snowline specifically, though, if we take out drilling, which, by the way, made up over 90% of the operating expenses for the company over that 3-month period, the total burn was around $315,000 a month on average to cover stuff like paychecks, consulting, marketing, offices, and so on. But boring numbers to the side, Snowline has one of the largest exploration portfolios that I've come across, and definitely in the Yukon, covering over 3,300 square kilometers spread across 8 projects. The star of the show here is the Rogue project, though, because that's where the flagship Valley discovery is, where late last year the company reported intervals of up to 2.5 grams over about 520 meters. So that's an almost 1,300 gram meter hole, starting right at surface in what is a reduced intrusion-related gold system, potentially similar to Kinross's Fort Knox and Victoria Gold's Eagle mines. This hole was not an exception, by the way, for the 2023 drill or the 2022 drill program for that matter either, because all of the top 10 holes in terms of gram meter in a similar setting since 2022 were drilled by Snowline, 8 of which came from that 2023 drill program. And all of them come from the Rogue project. As of a few days ago, by the way, the Snowline has also reported that grab samples are suggesting there might be potential for a similar, what they call sibling discovery, about 12 kilometers away from Valley. But hopefully more in that later on in the conversation. And overall, this project has many targets. Actually, most of the 30 targets the company has defined across the 8 projects that they have are on the Rogue project. And although I like listening to my own voice, I'm not going through all of them here. Instead, I'm jumping to Einarson. That's the project adjacent to the north of Rogue. And there's another discovery there. It's called Jupiter. And this is a different type of system. It's an epizonal orogenic gold system. And although this part of the Yukon is mountainous, and a lot of the world's orogenic gold deposits are found in, or we'll call it around, mountainous belts, often because of tectonic activities. This is actually the first gold discovery of this type in the region, and the Jupiter gold discovery is potentially similar to Agnico's Fosterville mine and Newfound Gold's Queensway discovery. But this is much earlier days than Valley, and far fewer holes have gone into this project, although the ones that have confirmed that there is gold mineralization here. Actually, mineralization was hit in the first hole that they ever sunk into this project, and although there's no 1,000 gram meter holes here, the best intercepts still show nearly 14 grams over about 6 meters. Again, much more to be said here too, but I feel like this should be enough speaking. So, Scott, I want to give you the word here, and I want to pick it up from the perspective of the Robert E. Leckie Award that you received last year, because this is an environmental award, which I'm not too familiar with, but I have heard of it. So talk to me about that. What does it take for someone to receive that reward specifically from the First Nations point of view?
Okay, well, thank you, Antonio. Well, just to be clear, the Robert E. Leckie Award is awarded by the Yukon government, but with input from various branches of government and First Nations, and so it's given to various companies in response to their work towards environmental stewardship and their approach in general. And often you see big reclamation efforts rewarded, really well done projects, and really it's nice to have that that stamp of approval, or at least the recognition. I'm not talking about Snowline specifically, but it's nice to see the government looking at projects and seeing where it's done right and kind of shining lights on those projects when they come about. And so in our case, I think we were we're obviously very happy to get it, somewhat lucky to get it. I think that a lot of companies share our approach, and we're certainly working hard to be leaders in that pack, and really not just do, okay, here's what the industry standards are, but to exceed best practices where we can, and to find innovative new approaches. One of those was setting up basically from early in the company. We actually, before we launched the company, we sat down with the First Nation of Anishinaabe, their Dev Corp, and really talked about what we were doing, and looking for ways to collaborate, trying to understand what how they viewed this project just from right out of the gate, and establish those open lines of communication, and that sort of thing. And a lot of really good things have come from that. And one of them was a solar panel array that powers our camp. It's not solely powered by that. We do have a backup diesel generator, but a majority of the power from our camp comes from that solar array. And in the Yukon, where we're doing summer exploration work, and we have nearly 24 hours of sunlight up there, it's a fantastic solution. And so it saves us, it reduces our carbon footprint. It saves us flying in a whole bunch of fuel. It actually makes for a much nicer camp environment. I'm used to camps in the Yukon bush, and that background generator buzz is just something you always hear. So it's almost bizarre to be out at camp, and it just, here's a big camp with people running around, and a cook tent and an office tent and sleepers and everything else, and yet it's quiet. You actually really feel like you're out there on the land, and yeah, so that, and from the DevCorp's point of view, I think that was a very successful flagship project. They hadn't had a company that would take that step with them before. They've expressed an interest in being key players in the energy infrastructure of their traditional territory. And here, it's a small step, but it's a concrete step and an actionable step to have this generation facility at our camp that they own, and that we lease from them. And on the back of that, the successful proof of concept there led to a lineup of potential customers there, and they've, through the success of that, launched a renewable energy subsidiary. So that steps like that. And then in 2023 specifically, our field team was out and looking at an old site where, one of the few places in Rogue where there has been historical exploration. And they found an old camp that was just walked away from out there, and old barrels, tent pads, that kind of thing. And so, yeah, I don't think anyone wants to see that out there. The tent pads aren't usable at this point. And so, yeah, they did a great job of reclaiming that site. We hauled things out, and yeah, there are a few different things. I don't need to go through them one by one, but really, I think from our side, it comes down to recognizing that this is the kind of company that we want to be, and really communicating that internally very consistently, and just making sure that we're all in the company aligned on that objectives, and making, I say this a lot, but going from the obligatory ESG slide in our deck to actually having this be a part of our company's DNA. So we're really happy to get that award, and really happy that approach seems to be working.
Does that include, when I said, by the way, at the beginning, from the First Nations point of view, as I was thinking about what element of First Nations involvement does that award include, or is it not that way?
It's not that you necessarily have to have First Nations involvement to get that award. I've seen it issued in the past where there was a placer miner, for instance, that built in the reclamation, they went kind of above and beyond and built a swimming hole. Essentially, they're doing all this earthworks for reclamation anyway, and they thought, okay, how can this be optimized? And they built this beautiful place that became a really popular destination for the community nearby. And you can see how that would get approval not just from First Nations, but including First Nations and the broader community at large. And so they weigh into the decision making, but the project it isn't necessarily just the award isn't necessarily just about those partnerships. But in our case, we certainly had that working in our favor, and we're really happy to have the relationships, the partnerships, and so on that we do have in place, and that's something we're actively looking to expand and build upon. And yeah.
But you're that far up north, is the land that you're currently exploring, or is that actively used for trapping or hunting or anything else?
Yes and no. So as I said, our kind of key areas are within the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, and we have some areas as well that overlap with traditional territory of the Ross River Dene Council. They're a Casca Nation, and yeah, in our like right around Valley. It certainly used for for people or by people for thousands of years, as the entire Yukon has been, and but I think since it's far from the major rivers, and so it wouldn't have been a heavily trafficked area necessarily when the rivers were really the highways of the Yukon, and then of course in the 1950s the highways became the highways of the Yukon in the 1940s, and a lot of people who lived in the bush, both First Nations and others, sort of came out. And unfortunately, there was the whole residential school push did a lot, and yeah, it had a lot to do with First Nations being moved out of the bush and really losing a lot of that identity and that culture and so on. So, while the reasons are quite unfortunate. I mean, there hasn't really been much activity in our area that we're aware of. And that's not to say there aren't some land claims more broadly, not on our claims, but in the surroundings, and those are still used, and those have been identified as areas of interest in our conversations with the First Nations. But a lot of the hunting and trapping that does go on out in that region, there are some big outfitters concessions. And so basically, you have generally foreign hunters coming in on these big ticket hunts that they pay a lot of money for. So there's a bit of that more broadly in the area, and we're in close communication with various land users out there. There aren't too many, so it's fairly easy to keep tabs on. And we've had a lot of back and forth with the outfitters too. We're careful not to step on their toes, and we're careful to try to leave things better than we found them. And same with trappers. We overlap. You can see this in the technical report for the Rogue project and for the Anderson project, for that matter. Where those concessions are, and we're close in communication with the trappers too, and try to help them out where we can. But these are huge concessions, so it's not like Rogue and someone's concession are going head to head in terms of livelihood. It's these concessions are the size of European nations. They're huge areas where various outfitters will have exclusive right to do guided hunting in that area.
That was an unnecessary jab at Belgium right there, but yeah, I see.
Jab.
The agreements that you have with the First Nations right now, how did that come to be? And what I'm trying to understand here is sort of how the whole process worked. Like, did you just have to sign one agreement and now you've just been working on that, or is it sort of a continuous consultation over time?
Well, so to be clear, we don't have any formal agreements right now with any First Nation. We have partnerships with the DevCorp of the Anishinaabe, where, for example, this lease agreement on the solar panels, and then we're working with companies that either are owned by or themselves have partnerships with that DevCorp and with other First Nation DevCorps in the territory. And so those are, that's the level that we're at right now. We're a fairly new company, and until quite recently, we've been a fairly small company. So it's been a little bit difficult to get onto the radar. And, to answer the other part of your question, there's no formal process. It's really something, it's a new and developing space. I shouldn't say it's a new space, but really, I think that the industry has really grown a lot in the past few decades in terms of recognizing the importance of First Nation contribution and involvement, and of course, forces from outside coming in, talking about free, prior, and informed consent and so on have pushed things in that direction as well. And so it's certainly an evolving landscape, and I think it's easier for a bigger company to get their foot in the door, just because the First Nations have a lot on their plates, and they're dealing with a lot of different things, and mining is, while it's our bread and butter kind of 24/7, it's one small aspect of what they have going on. And so and you look at capacity issues and constraints and that sort of thing. And so, especially, when you look at certain First Nations that have very rich in mineral potential traditional territories, then they're dealing with, dozens potentially of companies banging at their door and all wanting to do some kind of agreement. And each one of those companies requires a bunch of attention. They have to look through. They're not just going to, okay, well, here are the terms of our agreement. Let's, they're going to think about, okay, where's that company working? What is that area to us? What, and they'll have their internal databases of what significant areas are out there, or what finds or even traditional knowledge areas they have that they don't necessarily want the entire world to know about. And so case by case, they need to put a lot of resources into this. And so that's why when they kind of recognize, okay, well, this is a higher profile project, it's kind of easier to advance those conversations, because they recognize, okay, this is it's a little bit of triage on their point, where there are only so many things they can deal with. And so, but this one seems to be consequential and potentially very beneficial. And so, yeah, I think that's kind of where we're getting to in terms of having established something very special in the Yukon. And I think that the open approach that we've taken and trying to listen, trying to understand from the start of the company is, we're very grateful for the attention that both nations that our various projects are primarily in, and there are others in the Southwest Yukon too. We're grateful for the time that all these nations have given us in terms of talking to us and considering our projects, and we're very happy that we've made this a strong push from the start, so that we can have these informed decisions and really and build something that works, whether it's at Valley, but also potentially other targets as well, and other projects as well. Basically mutually beneficial advancements for the territory.
Does any of that involve you specifically trying to employ First Nations within the company outside of the contracts that you're signing there?
Yeah, and we recruit heavily in the relevant communities, and we certainly have First Nations individuals who have made big contributions on our team. In Notch-and-Yankton territory, we are competing with active mines that are basically a quick drive away, and so we're a fly-in, fly-out operation, which means shift work, which means being away from home and family, and so and it's seasonal versus a year-round mining operation. So we don't have necessarily the uptake that we would have if we were the only operator out there, but nonetheless, that's still, I think, a really important push. And as we do become a more stable sort of household name there, we hope to see that those contributions increase.
Does that what are the jobs typically that they have? Because as far as I understand it, from what I've heard from the others and sort of my own research, if you will, it's typically sort of technicians, field workers type of jobs. Is that the case with you as well?
Yeah, at this point, yeah, and that comes down to some of the history that I was touched on earlier of just there's still, I think, a disadvantage in terms of getting over that threshold. You don't necessarily see as many First Nations graduates from engineering programs, as we touched on earlier this week, but from engineering programs or from geology programs or that sort of a thing. And so, and a lot of our jobs are geological jobs. And as we grow as a company, we'll have engineering jobs in the mix. But those, of course, you need to have that technical grounding. And so, just as a result of that scenario, you can recruit as widely as you want, but if you aren't finding someone with that degree, then it's very hard to just outright hire a geologist. Certainly, you can hope to get people who might be interested in that path and encourage that and nurture that, and if that's something that they generally want to do. But yeah, right now, generally it's equipment operators, and also you look at it from in as much as you can from a First Nations perspective, from specifically like a community based First Nation, like living in a small town in the Yukon, and it's great to have a geology job, if you can get one, or even a mining job, but it may be that, okay, this mining project goes for 10 years and then and then what, and so I think some of those those technician skills and heavy equipment operator skills are more broadly transferable. And so, they might be working as a firefighter, like a wildland firefighter 1 year, and then on a mine site the next year, and, in forestry the next year, and it's a land steward or something. And so like those are, you get some transferable skills in that. Whereas if you were to go in as a mining engineer, as many geologists and mining engineers and others can attest, you're probably looking at a lifestyle that sees you moving all over the place too. So, that's another consideration.
Yeah, that's among the lines of what Brandon was telling me too from Fireweed. But it's well, in your case, hopefully, it's not only a 10-year type of thing, especially by the looks of how big this thing could be. And this is the forward-looking statements that we always talk about here. But you also have a sustainability and an external relationships manager now that you've taken up on board, Brian. What is his responsibility going to be something along the lines of what we're talking about here now?
Yeah, that's a big part of it. It's kind of we're still a young company. We're still somewhat of a startup. And so, you have people wearing various different hats. But that's the key hat, is really strengthening those relationships. And Brian's worked with us as a consultant for a while. So we sort of know what we're getting. And we're really happy that he's with us. And he has a background. He was actually a vice president at the Dena Nazidi. That's the development corporation for the Ross River Dena Council, to our south. And so, yeah, so that's real kind of boots on the ground experience and real connections with the First Nation, and a much better understanding. But that's a key part of his role, is to look for how we can progress in a mutually beneficial way, both the company and our social impact in the territory, and specifically with First Nations communities, but also keeping those lines of communication open. And really, I think we all work hard to really be receptive and listen. And I think there was a kind of point in the transition from taking First Nations to like not being in the equation or the conversation at all, to there was sort of I think a check mark era where it's like, okay, yeah, we consulted them, and now we're going to go ahead with what we wanted to do anyway. And they just got a box checked by sitting down with the First Nation for a while. But I think we moved past that, and it's really about collaboration at this stage. And so that's a key part of my job and Brian's job as well. And but similar sort of triage situation of a lot of different things going on. And so I take that very seriously and spend a lot of time and have a lot of time for the various First Nations, just having someone in a full-time capacity who's really looking at that and pushing us forward and making sure that there's no pot on the stove that's going untended. Then that's a key part of what he's doing with us.
I appreciate that. I appreciate this overview and how it works. I'm hearing different stories here, and it's helping me wrap my head around better than what I typically can from my desktop research. So thank you for this overview, Scott. I don't want to take up all of your time today, though. So let's move on to talking about rocks, which I know you get excited by, because you've just found some new, also potentially exciting rocks that are of interest, 12 kilometers away from Valley. So that's now a priority target, I assume. How are you going to be following it up?
So that's Aurelius, and that's an interesting area. So Valley is just as you mentioned early on, it's a reduced intrusion related gold system. So it's basically this intrusion came up into the crust 90 million years ago. And it didn't make it to the surface. It's just this body of magma that kind of settled, but it wasn't alone. A whole bunch of these came up in this kind of 60 by 30 kilometer area that we're calling the Rogue Plutonic Complex. And some of them were bigger, some of them are smaller. Valley's one of the smaller ones, but there are quite a few of these smaller ones. And when we started prospecting prior to Snowline, just as private prospectors, my father actually dragged me into that area just shortly after I got my geology degree. He had been looking at the maps, looking at the geochem, and was intrigued. And we went out there to what's now our Gracie target. and started poking around, but also looking at the regional picture, we were really excited by just, well, for example, at that point, we didn't know Valley existed. Valley wasn't even an intrusion on the map, and that just gives an idea of how underexplored these areas are. The kilometer-wide outcropping intrusion, only parts of it are outcropping, but still, kilometer scale intrusion that's just not even on the map. And yeah, so we found some mineralization there. It looked really interesting. We went around, did a bunch of stream sediment samples, and combined with the regional picture of just looking at all these intrusions and the anomalous gold geochemistry coming off this huge area, it was enough for us to look at securing the whole thing. And we were very fortunate to find a patron in a company at that time that basically helped us to stake this massive area, and covering that whole plutonic complex, or just the big parts of that plutonic complex, and they did a lot of baseline work. And so, this is a long way of getting to the answer to your question, but just for the appropriate background here, the Aurelius target, was one of many that came out of that work. At least at that point, it was conceptual. There was the government stream geochem data collected in the 90s, which showed a really high stream sediment sample coming out of one of the creeks that drains that target area more broadly, and then a few from the north that had really elevated values. And then in the work that company did, I think as prospectors, we had taken a sample there, and the company had also taken a sample. So 3 samples from the same creek taken by different people at different parts of the stream, and they're all not just anomalous, but very anomalous. And so that had us, and I don't think even with this soil grid that we've necessarily explained that anomaly yet. So so that was good. All of them, I don't know the exact numbers off the top of my head, but I think 2 of the 3 were over 0.1 grams per ton in stream sediment samples, where, you might start to look at a stream when it's even 10 or 20 parts per billion, as opposed to 100 parts per billion, which this is. And one of those samples was 1.2 grams per ton, if I'm not mistaken. So there's, it's historical data, not verified by Snowline, but nonetheless, we took at least one of those samples, and the government data is usually pretty good. So yeah, so that geochem and then these magnetic highs in that area are the other thing that had us really interested. These intrusions, when they come up, they cook the rocks around them, and they can make these magnetic highs. When they come out on surface, they're a magnetic low. And so they can make kind of a donut when you look at it from the top, this high around a low signature. But here you just have the high. And so you know that, okay, the intrusion that came in has cooked the rocks, it's made them magnetic, but it hasn't come to surface. And so that was kind of the starting point. We poked around there a bit in 2022. Found some interesting rocks. We actually found that outcropping granodiorite, but it wasn't mineralized, and it wasn't until this year that we stepped out more broadly, did more systematic soil sampling and so on, and found this big anomaly there. And so really, and then going in and we see a lot of the alteration that you'd expect around a heat source, and so sampling some of that alteration, silicification in these volcanic units up on the ridge top there. That's where we got the chip samples. We had 2 grams over 14 and 17 meters respectively from 2 different outcrops about 235 meters apart. And so it's really nice. It's one thing to get a soil anomaly. It's another to be able to dig your hammer basically into mineralization that's outcropping. And so we're really happy to have that resolution on a target. And I think that, given the scale of the anomalism in that area, that there could be more targets in the vicinity. In fact, we think there are more targets right in the vicinity and of Aurelius and more broadly on the Rogue project as well. Like I said, that's what drew our attention in a long time ago, was the regional footprint. There's still a lot of intrusions to test out there, and I don't think Aurelius is going to be the only target to come out of the regional exploration.
What else is helping you hone in on these targets? And where I'm coming from with this, because you say in the news release that it's, and what you're just telling me here is that this is quite similar to Valley in many ways, but it's not an exact copy. What are the differences and what are the similarities that can help you find another target like this?
Yeah, well, so just in the first part there, what's really guiding us or what tools we're using. The geophysics is huge. That just the way that these things behave magnetically, as the mag lows for the intrusions, generally not always the case, but generally you get a nice mag low. And similarly, yeah, not always the case, but generally you get a big mag high in the hornfels around it. So that's been really useful. These rocks are pretty quiet magnetically regionally. And so even we're using as a baseline, just this data from the 1960s of these mile wide spacings on this really broad regional magnetic survey. And that's enough to even start to vector into targets like Aurelius. And actually that target has been on my mind for a long time, since we first pulled up the magnetic signatures out there back in 2008. And then, yeah, and following that up, like I said, with the regional stream geochem, that's if you have a mag anomaly and you have a gold coming off it in that neck of the woods, that's a pretty strong start to going in and following up. And then there has been, while it's mostly there's a lot of work to be done for the mapping, there has been some good in the Rogue area, 1 to 50,000 scale mapping done primarily in the 90s by Yukon Geological Survey and Geological Survey of Canada mapper. And so, a lot of the intrusions are known. They're not all known, but a lot of them are on those maps. And so you have that as a starting point as well. But, where we've been really successful so far is finding the things that aren't on the map, which maybe sounds obvious, maybe it is obvious, as far as places to look go. But yeah, things like Valley, just brand new. Aurelius isn't on the map as an intrusion. And in fact, there's no reason for it to be, apart from the small outcrops that we found. We think that it's basically intact, hopefully near surface. And then the second part of your question, looking at the sort of similarities and differences, that's one difference is Valley is sticking out of the ground. We're just drilling into, there's some outcrops of beautiful mineralization there. And then where it's covered by a thin veneer of glacial till and alluvial sediments that's, anywhere from a meter to maybe 15 meters thick. Generally, you get to bedrock within the first few meters. And yeah, so we're just drilling into the heart of one of these things that's been exposed by glacial erosion and so on over the millions of years. At Aurelius, similar to our Gracie target, which is to the east of Valley, about 4 kilometers. There we have the same geochemical fingerprint. So it's not just about gold. You also have bismuth and tellurium and a few other elements that really make a sort of a geochemical signature of like, these fluids are coming out of the intrusion. This gold is associated with an intrusion versus just this gold is floating around the country rock, or it came in this orogenic style vein or something like that. So that's a big tell when you get that geochemical signature. And that's and then also just looking at the rocks at Gracie, like I said, this is a big regional just area of sedimentary rocks. Like, it was a pretty quiet place for a long time, called a passive margin. You just get a bunch of sandstones and siltstones, just really fine sediments raining down for millions and millions of years. And so you can imagine it's a pretty boring thing to look at when you look at it like geophysically or that sort of a thing. And so it's really the intrusions that are driving that. And when you're walking along this ridge and suddenly the rock changes and it's super hard and you hit it with the hammer and it rings like a bell and you see all this rust coming out of it because it's had all these sulfides cooked into it and so on. You can tell there's some really high temperature alteration at Gracie and also at Aurelius. And so when you see that, okay, this is high temperature, low pressure alteration. So it's not like this rock, these sediments went way down into the Earth's crust and came back and they're all like that. It's just, this is a spot area, a few kilometers where something has cooked this. There's no intrusion in the vicinity of it. It has to be underneath it. And so, there's an intrusion down there. And then, yeah, with both Aurelius and Gracie, you have these strong geochemical fingerprints, the gold, the bismuth, the tellurium. Aurelius is a little bit different in that we have an outcropping intrusion nearby. And so that's a hint. It's not like proof, but it suggests that we could have a potentially shallower intrusion, that could be just part of the actual same intrusion that's under Aurelius. And so we'll be doing some geophysics to look at the resistivity and to see if we can basically see the intrusion, looking at the resistivity of the rocks. We hope to have that done before too long into the season. That'll just depend on the contractors' constraints. We're keen to get that done as quickly as we can. And then, the other thing that makes Aurelius unique from Gracie as a potentially intact intrusion is that at Gracie we have the anomalous on surface and we have some good grab samples and so on, but we don't really have like a solidly mineralized surface unit that we know about yet. Whereas here at Aurelius, we're seeing that, and we're seeing mineralization in those trenches, or those chip samples anyway, that we took. And so that's exciting in itself because, you're looking at those grades and you're looking at those distances and, you're starting to get into some pretty interesting country right there. And depending on how well those grades carry in these units through this surface anomaly, we may have a second target that's right at surface there. Basically, a lot of reduced intrusion related gold systems, or intrusion related gold systems in generally, or more generally, are hosted in the sediments, or hosted in both the intrusion and the sediments. Valley is very much intrusion hosted, and as we get out into the sediments in most directions, we see that the grades drop off pretty quickly. Gracie looks like it could be similar in the same way that we're drilling through, and we're seeing veins, mineralized veins in the sediments, but we're not seeing the density you need to really have ore essentially in these systems. But it really is to see this mineralization in the sediments is encouraging at this stage. So yeah, we have a target right there that's not necessarily intrusion. And even if the intrusion is way down, this could be one of those systems where you're actually finding your mineralization in the country rock. So that's that's a key difference as well. And geochemically, the fingerprint is, it's very much reduced intrusion with that bismuth and tellurium, but there are a few other things in there that we don't know quite what to make of yet. There's some silver numbers in those trenches, and that that could be overprinting, that could be some kind of zonation thing, but we're still working to figure that out.
Chasing the intrusion, though, I assume is sort of maybe not the first, but the main priority, because that's what really is going to potentially prove that this is a lot more like Valley than it is like Gracie, right?
Well, we're hoping that Gracie's like Valley too. We're not done working there. That's still a pretty exciting target. To have drilled into that and to have found the same veins and the same orientation that are bearing visible gold. Last year, we got into some basically a plume of bismuth, which would come off the intrusion. So we're getting closer. And what is exciting about either of these targets, though, is basically that a lot of these systems, and the classical view of this model is that the highest grades are going to be kind of near the carapace, the intrusion, like near the top. And that's part of why Valley is so special, is that the top is just what we're seeing, like maybe 100 or 200 meters have been eroded away. And so we're still near the top of the thing. And that's why, our highest grades are right at surface, and they tend to drop as we go down. Although, so we're seeing some really interesting stuff at depth in terms of some discrete high grade veins and so on. But so the potential prize of an intact Valley, where that extra, it's like Valley, but also it has another 100 or 200 meters of high grade or even higher grade material on top, is, that's what has us pretty excited. And yeah, I think your assessment is right, that would be, at least conceptually, I mean, gold's where you find it, but it's good to have some idea of what you're looking for. And part of that, what we're looking for, a key part of what we're looking for at Aurelius is that intrusion and that mineralization, and that special endowment that Valley has that is really unique in terms of this class of deposit style in general.
I don't assume you can tell me exactly how many meters you're drilling across the properties this year, because you haven't released anything official yet. But what is, if you look at the split between Gracie, Valley, Aurelius, and everything else that you're drilling, how do you think percent-wise, how do you think that's gonna look like?
It'll come down to operational efficiencies. I mean, right now, and Valley's quite efficient. So, Valley's going to be more than 50%. We have 3 drills out there right now. And the sort of very baseline plan would be fire up 2 of them on Valley and keep going. So that would be, we had 2 drills going at Valley last season. We got just shy of 16,000 meters on the Valley target. So that would be basically what we would be able to get with that baseline strategy of 2 drills there. And that's a lot for a system like Valley, where it's that continuous. And so we can, just like we did in terms of where we were coming out of the 2022 season and where we are now, we can really shine a light on what's happening at Valley with that amount of drilling. So it's a very efficient way to explore. And then we're looking at potentially bringing in a 4th drill to basically assist that 3rd drill in testing the regional targets. So we did have a 3rd drill hopping around, and there's where the efficiency kind of drops off, because you're drilling a new site. It's not just like production line stuff like at Valley, and sometimes the topography is more challenging depending on the target. And so we hope to have 2 drills hopping around from target to target, doing meaningful either phase 2 or phase 1 programs. And yeah, testing these. And so it'll really just come down to the operational efficiencies. But I'm not expecting to get anything close to the 16,000 or call it 15 just to not overcommit here. But whatever we can get out of we were kind of aiming for 10 with those two drills, like 5,000 out of a drill in that thing in one season is pretty good. And so it's a testament to what the team was able to accomplish out there and the efficiencies that we were able to push that 10 up to 16. But we're looking at just what we can get out of those two drills. So I think in a very good scenario, you get 5,000 out of each of them, but I don't think we're going to get that much out of them just based on the logistics of drilling these targets and more limited windows too, potentially depending on the elevations of various targets.
Yeah. Managing wildfires, I assume, is also a bigger part of your calculations this year after last year.
Yeah, I mean that's a consideration every year. And we were fortunate that we didn't have any wildfires in the area last year, not in our project areas. There was one near Mayo, the community of Mayo, that which is where we run a lot of our supplies through from the airport there. And so we had to reroute a few things for a while that community was under alert and evacuated. And then we that's been on the radar every season and always something to be aware of.
Okay. But I mean, Rogue is where all the action is going to be happening. Basically, you're not going to any of the other projects.
I wouldn't say never, especially before we have our formalized plan in place. But yeah, that's our focus is on Rogue, and we're most excited at this point anyway by finding some of these intrusions. But we're always kind of pushing away on other projects as well.
Fair enough. Again, maybe a good time to catch up would be once you have that official plan out. There'd be more to talk about. When do you think that's going to be, pre-PDAC or after PDAC?
That'll be after PDAC. Yeah, a fair bit. So we're not obviously we want to have our ducks in a row for the field season, or we're putting in the ducks that we know we need to have, but we're also digesting and looking at the regional targeting based on these recent release results and others. So figuring things out, just how they stack up against each other.
Last time we spoke, you also told me that you'll be doing some more met work, more serious met work, if you could call it, because it's bigger drills that you're going to be using this time. When's that planned for? How's that going to look like?
Yeah, so that's that material's at the lab, and so it'll just come down to the various processes, and that'll give us a lot of information in terms of how to refine different like the network we've done so far. It showed that this is very cooperative gold mineralization that's non-refractory, and that basically a whole bunch of different off-the-counter methods are pretty useful on it. We had average recoveries from different methods of between 94 and 96%. So that was really good to see. And some of this work that we're doing now will kind of better quantify that, and also look at, okay, how much crushing is needed, and what's the trade-off between, like, obviously if you do less crushing, then you're just in general, you're going to get less gold out of these rocks, versus if you're just working on a fine powder. And so trying to look at where it gets some profiles so that those sort of processes can be optimized, and get a better sense of what final numbers you'd actually be looking at in terms of how much you want to crush down rock and what that means in terms of recovery and so on. But it's a trade-off, and maybe you don't lock down that until you're actually basically building the thing. But at least having a sense of what those options are from an early stage will be really beneficial in helping us basically better understand the potential mine that we're exploring for now.
That's not necessarily related to your field season of 2024 in any way, but you expect that that's going to come back from the lab before you start drilling in what I assume is May, or how do you see it?
Well, some of the tests, like we're doing some column testing for heap leaching, and that takes many months just to run a test. Others could certainly come back before the field season.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Okay. Any other news? Anything else to look forward to in the meantime between those?
Hopefully, I mean, we've always got a lot pushing ahead. We're hoping to kind of shine a better light on a lot of the regional work that we've been doing, and that sort of a thing. And so, yeah, don't expect us just to be sitting on our hands from between now and the field season.
What I meant more with that is that there was like you had all the assay results out from the drill program, but then this Aurelius news kind of came as a more of a surprise, if you will, to a lot of people not expecting maybe to have some cheap chip samples of or something else coming in. That's what I meant. Well, something else. Like, do you have something similar to that to come out,
Um,
like
like I
chip
say,
samples or anything else like that?
we'll be shining lights on a bunch of different targets.
Hmm.
Just trying to yeah, I think the team's done some really good work out there. And we'll, as we kind of digest it and get everything in and understood, yeah, letting people get a more holistic picture of this broader complex.
All right, thank you, Scott, for the overview. I'll be moving up the market cap ever so slightly to the last participant for today, which is Fission Uranium. That says the name suggests a uranium development company that's developing a high-grade uranium deposit on the western side of the Athabasca Basin in Saskatchewan, Canada. The company is listed on a TSX main board under the ticker symbol FCU, where an average of about 2.7 million shares trade each day, with a 52-week high of $1.33 and a 52-week low of 55 cents. With a market cap of 880 million Canadian dollars and 830 million shares outstanding today, this is a $1.06 stock. There are 52 million options and 25 million warrants, resulting in about 907 million fully diluted shares, split give or take about halfway between institutional and retail ownership. As of the last financial statement, the interim financial statement, which is dated September 30, the company had over $50 million in cash and cash equivalents and about $2 million in current liabilities with no long-term debt. You guessed it, though, you will have to go to the company's website as well as setterplus.ca to review the most up-to-date data by the time you're watching this, because the money is there to be spent, right? On top of that, Fission has also, by the way, just closed a $75 million bought deal financing. They've also just started drilling, while hopefully they're also keeping the lights on. So again, that costs money. For Fission specifically, that costed less than $400,000 a month on average over the last reported quarter. So again, the financial situation would just be different by the time you're watching this, and it's your responsibility to keep yourself up to date with it. I know a lot of you will already know this company and their main asset, but in an effort to listen to my own voice for as long as possible, the main focus for Fission is the Triple R uranium deposit, which is located on the western side of the Athabasca Basin in Saskatchewan, Canada. More specifically, it's on the PLS corridor, which is the same corridor that hosts NextGen's Arrow deposit and other uranium deposits too. This is the only shallow uranium deposit of significant size on that side of the basin and on this corridor, and it contains 115 million pounds grading 2% of U3O8 in the indicated category, and another 15 million pounds grading over 1% in the inferred category, with the high-grade core starting of that deposit starting at just about 50 meters depth from surface. This is an advanced stage asset, so it's at the feasibility stage. The feasibility study was done in early 2023, and it showed an almost 900 million US dollars at NPV. I was just thinking about it there because it's typically in Canadian dollars, but if you translate that to US, that'd be 900 million US dollar NPV8, that is, with production costs notably under $10 US, resulting in a 27% internal rate of return and making it one of the very few high-margin uranium projects or potential uranium mines that at least have a shot of being in production during this cycle. Fission is not only a development company, though, because most of the land, actually about 80% of the land that they're located on, has still not been drilled, despite it showing geological similarities to both the Triple R and the Arrow discovery. So, as I mentioned earlier, they're now actively drilling. A small drill program is going on. Well, for the size of the company, a small drill program. So it's about 6,000 meters at 6 targets is what's going on, with results expected throughout Q2. So a few things to talk about here, Ross, but definitely the capital raise thing in the drill program. But you're the most advanced company that I'm talking to today at the feasibility stage. So I want to pick it up from the First Nations perspective. And I want you to basically tell me about what their involvement is with Fission at this stage of the mining process and how it all works?
Sure, absolutely. No, our northern relationships and the support that we get from the north, I think is critical, on our path forward to developing the project at PLS. We have a number of what we call priority recruitment communities. So in other words, there are communities in the area that we've already identified that are potentially impacted by the PLS project. And that's where we, hire most of our vendors, our select vendors out of there, and also get a number of our employees that join the company. And I might just to throw a few numbers at you, how important it is, and sort of the support that we do get there. I'd say since 2021, we're somewhere between 13 to 17 different companies that we would classify as local service support vendors. So these are the ones that are coming out of the priority communities. Numbers of people, probably 54 employees since 2021. And how do that translate in dollar terms to the communities? We've awarded more than $5.7 million in just the last 2 to 3 years worth of contracts that have been strictly based out of these priority recruitment communities that I'm referring to. So it is a significant part of our plans that we've been working with communities, really since day one of this project, but that continues to ramp up, and that whole process becomes more formal, as we continue to develop the project, and and also it will ramp up much further as this advances towards a producing asset, and where we're anticipating 2029. So it'll be busy, but our relationships with the north are absolutely key. The people are there, and the opportunities are there for service providers. So it's a big part of our business.
How have the permits or the MOUs that you have signed over the years worked? Like, what was sort of the different stages?
Yeah, well, those are primarily, I think what you're referring to are capacity funding agreements, which are, I think if that's what you're referring to. Now, we have 6 of those. Those are with 6 different Indigenous groups that really, again, are potentially impacted Indigenous groups in the area. Now, what those would be more focused on our environmental assessment phase of business. So while we're in the permitting process to get the PLS project, into production, these are agreements that allow those specific Indigenous groups to have a very close look at the project, the economics, the potential spin-offs with us, and it helps develop our commitment levels to those Indigenous groups. Now, those would be the capacity funding agreements, the agreements we have in place. Ultimately, we'll look towards building IBAs, impact benefit agreements, with the key Indigenous groups, and those will commit you, we'll say, to certain financial thresholds and milestones in the development of the project. In other words, it will kind of guarantee jobs, service opportunities, employment, training, just the whole spectrum of spin-offs with the development project, as well as some money benefits back to the community as well. So, as I say, these sort of relationships ramp up over time and get more and more formal as we move towards production. But it's been, what has it been now? Probably 15 years since we started working at the PLS project, and really, as I say, since day one, we've had pretty strong relationships with our northern community, and ensuring that we have as much local input as we possibly can.
Is this something you do differently if you could go back, though, to sort of the beginning of the company, which granted it was under a different leadership at the time, but still, if you could go back in time, would you do something differently regarding your communications or relationship?
I don't think so. I think it's been on track, right, property right from the get-go, and that's always been an area under my direct influence. As you say, I've started off with Fission as the vice president of exploration, moved up into the role of president. It's always been my role, I guess, leading the relationships with our local communities and First Nations and other Indigenous groups. So, I don't think we've ever really got off track, to be honest. But I also know that as projects continue to advance, such as this, and move towards true producing assets with a great deal of cash flow and opportunities, these sort of agreements get more and more formal as you move forward. But I think Fission's kept its name, quite proudly in the communities. I think that for the most part, the members in these northern communities have come to appreciate Fission. We've been very open with our communication and very responsive, and likewise listening to their concerns and what they hope to achieve and would like to be able to achieve, that things that we can help with. And, we're huge supporters of things that are outside of our, project directly. And I'm referring to initiatives where we can support community sports events. Local hockey is a huge thing in the northern communities. I know even in 2024 we'll be supporting local community hockey, and this is something we've done for years and years in the past. We support local charities as well. So it isn't just the people that can benefit from working on site, and having income that way, but it's helping to build service providers and even just basically trying to be as good neighbors as possible with the communities, and with our focus on helping as much as we can. I like to focus a lot of our assistance on education and sports. To me, you have to sort of pick what you can help with, but those are key areas for that I like the company to get involved with.
It's very cool that you're the person who, because as I mentioned, you're a VP of exploration back then, not the CEO. So I always assume the CEO is the person who has to deal with that, but it's basically been throughout the different stages as the company's developed. The relationship is also developed through you, basically.
Yeah, it's just always been my my role, I guess, with the company, to focus on the technical side early on, and as well as the community relations. It was, when we were a junior exploration company, it was really, my role, to lead that area.
And so the donation that you're making here to this conference, for which obviously thank you, is going towards specifically scholarships that are tailored toward First Nation students, because as far as I understand it, they're not well represented at the higher ranks within companies. They're often technicians or field workers, but not as often earth scientists. How's that situation with you? Do you have any First Nations higher up?
Well, I think that's a struggle that a lot of northern communities have, almost globally, to be honest. But it is something that we're aware of, and we do as much as we can to continue to help train people and support education. Our ultimate goal is really to have people in the northern communities at much higher levels in the jobs as we move forward. So it doesn't just happen automatically, and doesn't happen by snapping your fingers. It takes years and years of assistance, work, and dedication. But the people, I would say, in the northern communities, certainly in the area where we work, they're very eager to be able to advance forward and get better paying positions, better levels of employment within in companies in the mining business, and not just be at the entrance level of work. Now, but it takes time and it takes encouragement, and as I say, that's why I think education is such an important part of our focus for sponsorship. I'd like to do all that we can to be able to ensure that the local people have a strong education, and those that really want to pursue a degree in earth sciences to come in as a geologist or engineers, we would absolutely encourage and do what we can to continue to support that.
And I think and hope that's going to be happening a whole lot more on the western side of the Athabasca Basin as it's turning really into production hub over the next, call it 10 years.
Yeah, I think that's true. And it will, this is sort of the natural evolution of an area. There hasn't been a lot of opportunities in this part of the geographic area of the province of Saskatchewan, certainly a lot less on the western side than what we've had on the eastern side, where you've had almost, 70 years of uranium mining, on the eastern side of the basin. On the western side, where we have our project, where NextGen have their project, and the new discoveries are occurring, you're sort of starting, at the early levels of building up that skill set with the local communities. So it is early days there, but I think it's when I look out and I see what the opportunities are over the next several decades of uranium project development on the western side of the basin, I think there's an opportunity there for everything that the eastern side has been able to take advantage over the last 70 years. I think the people on the western side can, certainly have the same sort of expectations going forward.
Has it been challenging, though, keeping the communities informed because it is uranium, and maybe the question of radioactivity comes up? That's not something that I have a hard time understanding that myself, and how much radiation the mining is going to cause and all that. Has it been challenging informing people?
Not as much as you might think, and I think really it's because the people, you're multi-generations of people that are familiar with the mining industry, the uranium mining industry specifically in the province of Saskatchewan. Remember, it started the whole uranium mining business in Saskatchewan started in the Beaver Lodge area, just to the north of where PLS is located right now. So it would be, say, the northwest side of the province where uranium mining started in the 1950s. So you do have a level of familiarity with the overall sector, that I think has been handed down from generation to generation. So people are used to the nuclear sector, to uranium mining specifically. It's really the opportunities that that are now happening again, we'll say, to the western side of the province. That's where the new opportunities lie, I think, for the current and future generations in the province. But as working with probably third or fourth generation now of families that have grown up understanding the importance of mining, and in particular uranium mining in this part of the province, I think goes a long way for helping with our storytelling, and the ability to get local support.
Very cool. It's very cool to see how this. I don't think this is discussed enough, and definitely not in these interviews that are sort of rapid fire. Oftentimes, you don't really have time to go in depth on how it really goes down on the ground, but it's important. So thank you for yet another perspective on how things work. I know you don't have all day, and I also had a few questions about Fission too specifically. So let's get to those maybe here quickly. Capital raise, $75 million financing at $1.18, no warrant, and right before the dip that's currently happening in uranium. Why raise the money now? What's the decision here?
So, and the one point I just want to make too, because when you mentioned our cash balances, I think you'd said that was probably based on our last quarterly, some 50-odd million in the treasury. We are now, with this closing of this financing, actually at about $145 million. So
Yep.
because we had continued to raise a little bit of money in November, December on our ATM facility, which is now closed, but now complete with the new $75 million raise. Yeah, we're we have a very healthy treasury now at about $145 million. So all that money will be used towards the development of the project. As we continue to move towards a producing asset, it does get expensive to, move on to the next levels of development, but we have more than sufficient capital now in the treasury to get us all the way through the entire development phase. Basically, I think from where we're sitting right now with capital in the bank, we've got visibility on the next 2 to 3 years, and through the whole permitting process, I think we're well funded now. So we're in a position to be able to, when we make a positive mining decision based on receiving, permit approvals from both the province and the federal government, our treasury is going to be, in a nice place to be able to go forward from there. So I think we're, honestly, we couldn't have picked the timing better on the finance raise. The last week or two have been a little sluggish, a little bit of a pullback in the uranium sector. It's still very, very healthy, and in relative terms to, how the industry is, but it is taking a bit of a breather over the last couple of weeks. And we were able to do our finance raise though at $1.18, as you say, with no warrants. So we were always trying to minimize dilution as we continue to move forward. There's two parts to it. You do need to raise money, but you want to minimize dilution. And I think that we've been able to sort of achieve the best of both worlds as we move forward, minimize our dilution, and yet have a very healthy treasury that can get us through, all this very important development phase work that we're in right now.
Right. That's a long period that you're mentioning here of 2 to 3 years, where it's not, you're not saying we cover G&A with this, because I said G&A, it's under 400K. Maybe it's going to go up now because you've grown the team a little bit, but that's not only G&A. This money covers just the entire process, which there's a difference though. So what I've recently learned kind of the hard way is that there's a difference between not needing to raise money and not raising money, as in you don't need it, but are you going to raise money if you have the opportunity?
I think it's always prudent to, until you actually have cash flow in a project, and that's not going to happen until our asset is in production. You're always going to be in a situation where there's still, the way to access capital is well, typically through equity raises. There's other means as well, and as we continue to advance the project, we'll be exploring all kinds of the different elements. But I think you'll always, we do want to be in a position where we don't have to raise capital, and I'd say that's exactly where we're at right now. So if and when and how we raise capital will be more strategic, and the needs are not. I'd rather raise money when we can and when the opportunity is right, rather than when you have to, and you have less flexibility and less leverage on how you do so. But with the money we have right now, there's certainly, essentially no pressure on us to raise additional capital, and I think shareholders can be quite happy with that. We don't need to spin around and do further dilution. We can focus on the work at hand, which is to continue to advance the project. And you're right, our our G&A costs do increase as we continue to expand the team. We've expanded our development team. There's still a couple of hires, I think, that'll happen in this calendar year that will be additional help on the permitting side as that gets a little bit more advanced. But really, we pretty much have the full complement of people already in the development side to be able to carry us right through to the production part of the equation.
I got a little dopamine spike there when you mentioned M&A for a second, but
honestly, that was just a slip between M and G. So it's I was really referring to our G&A.
Got it.
Although look, in this business, there's always M&A activity, and I think in a healthy uranium sector, it wouldn't be unexpected to for companies to pay attention to M&A opportunities, and we always are. We know that there's potential for on this project. This is a world-class asset. There's always going to be interested parties, and maybe we have the ability to look at other opportunities to get involved with. But yeah, there's really nothing burning right there. So
There's 100 questions that I want to ask you here, but it's probably not much that we
sure.
can talk about here. But that's a fair point. Yeah, I understand that's the case. Uh, you still have some flow through money left too, I think. I mean, that's what the drilling is happening on right now, right?
Correct. Yeah. So we have an exploration program underway. If you recall, last fall we raised $9.2 million flow through funding, and that's really meant to fund the exploration program that we're on right now. So we began in roughly the middle of the third week of January. Our exploration program kicked off. It was a 6,000 meter budgeted program that should take us through to the end of March, early April. So we're somewhere in the middle of that program right now. So we have 2 drills on the project right now, testing different target areas along the very prolific Patterson Lake corridor where we find our Triple R deposit. So we're testing targets that are on strike and on parallel shear zones to that which hosts the Triple R deposit. So yeah, we're in the middle of that, and that is all being funded from the flow through equity raise that we did last fall.
And that's how you intend to keep it, or do you think you might put some hard dollars into it to grow the program?
I probably would look at raising additional. If we were to continue with our exploration program, I'd probably look at flow through funding as opposed to I'd rather keep the hard dollars, which hard dollars are also harder to raise too, if you will, and those are really the kind of that's the money that we can use to develop the project further and turn it into an operating mine, and to be able to finance the company's G&A activities. That's what requires the hard dollars. The flow through has to be spent on the ground. There's certain advantages to raising it, but it's really meant for exploration purposes and direct into the drill bit. So I think it's I like to keep those 2 sides of the ledger separate, and keep flow through dollars going strictly towards exploration. Keep the hard dollars strictly for development and for running the company. So you could use hard dollars to fund your exploration, but it likely makes a lot more sense to do that with the flow through funding processes that are available.
Yeah, that's why they call them hard dollars, right? Because they're hard to raise. That's where it comes from.
They are.
But okay, no, are you going to be reporting all holes that are coming out of the 6 zones, or only the significant ones all at once? How do you plan to report?
Yeah, we'll probably have an update. I would think shortly, partway through the drill program. Yeah, or may end up doing them all at once. Along the way, it's tough to know exactly how that's going to be. I mean, if there was something material that was intersected in one of the drill holes, we'd probably be very quick to release that. I don't like hanging on. In other words, a nice new high grade hit in a brand new zone, I think would be considered material, and that would be something that we would report on right away. But it's very encouraging in the area. I think partly what you're doing is assessing the overall corridor. Where is it that you want to focus all your exploration activities going forward? So this is sort of a first sweep right now of what we think is our key areas, and if we like what we're seeing, that will help us to guide where the next level of drilling will go. It's tough to find high grade mineralization right away when you first strike out into a new area, and your expectations are that you're really looking to vector yourself in to find that high grade mineralization. It has typically there's such a small footprint involved around a high grade, even finding a world-class deposit has a very small footprint. And, the process of discovery typically will take several seasons in a prospective area to make that discovery. It's very rare that you would have your first pass of holes hit something. Not to say that you wouldn't, couldn't happen, but it does often take time.
So they're more orientational drill holes to help you hone in on what is typically, when I look at those graphs that show the deposits across the Athabasca Basin, they're oftentimes like hairpins, if you will, or just pins in the ground. So you can almost just move the drill over them and miss them for a couple of meters.
You could miss them by the sides. You can miss them coming over and under them. The structures that host these high-grade uranium deposits they can be quite large, but what you're trying to do, you're still, first of all, trying to hit that initial structure that might host the high-grade uranium, and that'll give you the clues that there might be something in there. Elevated pathfinder elements, such as, well, uranium's a great pathfinder element for uranium, but boron, nickel, copper, cobalt. These are things that might lead you into being in the right area, but you still have to find out where in that structure would host specifically that high-grade uranium, and that's what you end up trying to vector yourself in. So I'd say with drill programs like this, typically the way I look at it is we're looking for the smoke and looking for the fire. Ultimately is really what the goal is, but you find it by seeing the bigger halo, the smoke, and then focusing in and finding the high grade mineralization, which would be the fire. So you're looking at the bigger halos, vectoring yourself into the actual target. Is this a fertile, prolific structure that we're on, or is it something that we wouldn't spend extra attention looking for something? But I think on the Patterson Lake corridor itself, this is a truly prolific uranium feature. It hosts two world-class deposits that are going into production just within a few kilometers of each other. That would be ours and NextGen's Arrow deposit. There are other showings of meaning along that corridor, and we think the chances for finding further high-grade mineralization that would be meaningful for our project is very real on the PLS land package.
Right. And you have Kanan and James working on it right now. So I assume most of the work falls on their shoulders right now, or how does that work?
Yeah, it does, and they're extremely capable geoscientists. Well, both of them have worked for Fission for a number of years. Kanan has been with us for, it's probably 12 years now. He was involved with our last discovery as well when we had a project on the eastern side of the basin. We've made a discovery near the old Rough Rider deposit, and he was a key person involved in that process for us. We call her J Zone, was the deposit that we'd sold to Denison Mines back in 2013, 2014. And he's been involved with the PLS project, including the discovery of Triple R, right since day one. Knows exactly, he and James have got better handle on that than pretty much any uranium geologist in the industry. So yeah, I've got great deal of confidence in their abilities to help us hone in and find the next exciting uranium deposit.
Good. In terms of permits or First Nations agreements, you're basically allowed to do, well, not whatever you want, but you're allowed to drill holes there, right?
Yeah, we permit ahead of time, and we inform the communities, what it is, what our intentions are over the next, you sort of renew them on a season by season basis. So, it's important for us to be able to communicate that. You don't want to catch anybody by surprise and just have approval from the government, but not relay that same desire of activity to the communities. I think there's two things that you're seeking. You're obviously seeking the approval from the government to go in and do that work. But if you're lopsided and just wait and receive that from the government, go in and do work, but you haven't actually communicated that with the communities, that's what creates a negative relationship, I think, with the northern people. They also want to know what our intentions are, for the upcoming seasons, and and the plans going forward, and that's a key part of our discussions in our permitting process. Yes, we seek approval from the government, from Saskatchewan Environment, but it's equally important to get the communication out to the community, so they also have a sense of what we're doing, and we're not strangers in the area that way.
Good. I appreciate the update, Ross. I think well, there haven't been too many news releases, but it sounds like Q2, end of Q2, you're thinking have some assays out. We can do this again, I think. But yeah, is that right? Q2 and Q2?
Yeah, I think that's probably fair. The assays typically have about seems to me about a 6 to 8 week turnaround between when we send them in and when the lab can actually give you results. So 2 months. So yeah, I'd say sometime in early Q2, I would think, or sometime in Q2 we'll have assay results from this winter program.
Good. Well, thank you for the update. What am I forgetting to ask you here?
No, I think we covered a lot of ground here today, and I really appreciate the early part of our discussion to be able to talk about our northern relationships and the agreements that we have with our local Indigenous partners in the area. I think that's a key part of our work and the process going forward. So I really do appreciate the opportunity to be able to expand on that a little bit more than we might otherwise in a number of discussions. So thank you for that.
And I thank you for the donation. The Young Mining Professionals thanks you as well. The money's going to go to good use. So thank you so much for thinking of this and for doing this.